Before humans became the animal that thinks, remembers, plans, and imagines, we first became the animal that changed food with fire. A raw meal asks the body to work hard before it can truly feed the brain. Cooking softened that burden. It made many foods easier to chew, easier to digest, and in many cases easier to draw energy from. That quiet change may have helped the human brain become larger, more costly, and more dependent on steady fuel than almost any other organ in the body. But this story is not only about intelligence, it is about a strange turning point, when a simple flame may have changed the shape of the human body, the rhythm of human life, and the future of the mind itself. So what really happened when cooking began to reshape the human brain forever? Why cooking changed the human brain forever? Before a human brain could become the kind of brain that remembers a childhood face, imagines tomorrow, learns a tool, follows a story, or lies awake under the dark sky asking why the world exists at all, the body had to answer a much older question. How do you get enough energy from the world without spending too much of yourself in the process? Long before kitchens, bowls, stored grain, clay pots, metal knives, ovens, or the soft foods that now seem ordinary, eating was not a gentle act. It was labor. It was pressure in the jaw, strain in the teeth, time spent breaking food apart, and a long hidden effort inside the gut after the swallowing was done. A fruit was not always sweet and soft. A root was not always tender. A seed was not already ground into flour. Meat was not cut into clean pieces and warmed until it gave way. Much of the edible world was tough, fibrous, uncertain, seasonal, and sometimes dangerous. The body could not simply take food and turn it into thought. It first had to fight for access to what the food contained. This is where the story of cooking begins, not with a clever invention, and not with one sudden moment when a human looked at fire and understood the future, but with a quiet pressure that existed in the body itself. Raw food asks many things from an animal. It asks the mouth to tear and crush. It asks the jaw muscles to repeat the same motion again and again. It asks the teeth to endure hard surfaces, grit, fibers, skins, and small fragments that do not easily fall apart. It asks the stomach and intestines to keep working after the meal has disappeared from sight. For many animals, this is simply the cost of being alive. A large part of the day can be shaped around finding food, handling food, chewing food, digesting food, and resting while the body tries to draw energy from it. In the deep background of human evolution, this matters because the brain is not a cheap organ. It is soft, delicate, and always in need. It does not wait politely until the body has extra fuel. It must be supplied constantly, even during sleep, even in silence, even when no great thought seems to be taking place. But no body can spend energy everywhere without limit. The ancient body had a budget, even if it never knew the word. If more energy went into chewing, moving through the landscape, maintaining a large digestive system, and processing difficult food, then less was easily available for other costly possibilities. This does not mean that cooking alone created the human brain. That would be too simple, and too neat for a story as long as human evolution. Many forces were involved: climate, walking upright, hands, tools, social life, childhood, cooperation, risk, memory, and the changing environments that early humans had to survive. But cooking belongs in this story because it touches the most basic exchange of all. It changes food before the body has to do all the work by itself. Heat can soften. Heat can loosen. Heat can make some foods easier to chew, and in many cases, easier for the body to use. A cooked tuber, a roasted piece of meat, or heated plant food is not just the same object made warm. It has been partly transformed outside the body. Some of the work has already begun before the first bite. That simple shift may sound small from the comfort of a modern room, where food arrives already cleaned, cut, softened, seasoned, stored, and safe enough to eat without much thought. But in the long human past, a small shift in energy could echo across an entire way of life. Less time spent struggling with a mouthful could mean more time awake, to notice, to remember, to watch others, to carry, to teach, to wait near fire, to care for a child, or to return to a place where food had been found before. Less effort hidden in the gut could change how the body balanced its needs. Softer food could matter not only to the strongest adult, but to the young, the old, the injured, and anyone whose teeth or strength were not at their best. Slowly, over many generations, eating was no longer only about what the landscape offered. It also became about what humans could do to food before eating it. That is a deep change. It means the human body was no longer facing nature exactly as it came. It was beginning to live inside a world slightly altered by its own behavior. Fire, when it became controlled and useful, did not merely sit outside the body as light in the dark. It entered the mouth through softened food. It entered the gut through meals that demanded a different kind of effort. It entered the long relationship between energy and thought. And somewhere inside that relationship, the future human brain found conditions that earlier bodies may not have had in the same way. The first step, then, is not to imagine a dramatic leap into intelligence. It is to imagine a tired body, a hard meal, a landscape that gives nothing freely, and a brain that can only grow more demanding if the whole body finds a new way to pay for it. Eating begins in the mouth, but it does not end there. For a body living before cooking became ordinary, every bite carried a chain of work. Teeth had to cut, crush, scrape, and grind. The jaw had to repeat the same motion again and again. The tongue had to move the food back into place until it was small enough to swallow. A hard seed, a tough root, a strip of raw flesh, or a fibrous piece of plant food did not become nourishment just because it could be eaten. It had to be broken open. It had to be made available. Before heat could help with that work, the body itself carried almost all of the burden. After swallowing, the effort only became hidden. The stomach and intestines had to continue what the mouth had started. Food is not energy in a simple form. It is energy locked inside cells, fibers, starches, proteins, fats, skins, and tissues. The body has to take these structures apart before it can use what they contain. Some foods give up their energy more easily. Others resist. Some pass through the gut with part of their value still unused. Some need long chewing, careful handling, or the right kind of preparation before they become truly useful. This is why the ancient problem of food was never only about finding enough. It was also about whether the body could draw enough from what it found. A landscape might offer many edible things, but not all of them were equally helpful. Some were too hard. Some were too bitter. Some were poisonous unless understood. Some were available only in certain seasons. Some required tools. Some required memory. Many required patience. And many required chewing. This matters because the story of the human brain is sometimes told as if thought rose above the body by itself, but the brain was never separate from the meal. A brain that remembers, plans, dreams, learns, fears, and imagines must be fed by the same body that walks, shivers, heals, sleeps, chews, and digests. If that body spends too much time and too much internal effort just making food usable, then the path toward a more expensive brain becomes narrower. Not impossible, but narrower. The beginning of the human mind is tied to the beginning of human energy. This is where cooking becomes important in a quiet way. It does not need to be treated as magic. It does not need to be made into a single explanation for everything. Its power comes from something simple. Cooking moves part of the work outside the body. Heat can soften plant tissue before the teeth touch it. It can change the texture of meat before the jaw has to pull it apart. It can make some starches easier to digest. It can reduce part of the raw resistance that once belonged mostly to the mouth, stomach, and intestines. Fire, in this sense, becomes more than warmth in the dark. It becomes a way of beginning digestion before the food enters the body, not replacing the body's work, but easing it. A cooked meal is therefore not just a raw meal made warm. It belongs to a different relationship between food and body. Raw food asks the animal to meet nature almost exactly as it comes. Cooked food has already been changed by behavior, attention, and control. It has passed through a human act before becoming part of human biology. Over many meals and many generations, that difference could matter. When food becomes easier to chew, the face experiences a different kind of pressure. When food becomes easier to process, the gut faces a different demand. When energy becomes more accessible, the whole body may have more room to support costly organs and costly behavior. None of this means fire alone created the modern human brain. Evolution does not move through one clean cause, but food sits close to the beginning of every life. A body that eats differently may rest differently, move differently, care for children differently, and gather with others differently. The deeper change was not taste. It was that humans began to make the world less raw before taking it in, and once that began, the fire outside the skin started to shape the work inside the skin, while the brain waited quietly for the body to find a new way to feed it. If the brain is one of the most demanding organs a human body carries, then the question cannot begin with thought alone. It has to begin with fuel. A larger, more active brain does not appear in a body as a decoration. It must be supported every day, through hunger, movement, cold nights, illness, childhood, pregnancy, injury, and sleep. It must receive enough energy even when the body is tired. It must keep working when the hands are empty and the landscape gives little. That is why the story of cooking matters before the story becomes a story about intelligence. The ancient body did not need ideas first. It needed a way to make life affordable. Without that, a costly brain would have been a heavy burden, not an advantage. A body can survive for a while with effort, but evolution works over many generations, not over one difficult afternoon. If a way of living asks too much from chewing, digestion, movement, and recovery, then only certain possibilities remain open. The mouth must do its work. The gut must do its work. The muscles must search, carry, climb, dig, escape, and endure. The young must be fed. The old may still hold knowledge, but they also need care. In that world, every useful calorie matters, not as a number written down, but as warmth, repair, attention, patience, and memory. The brain sits inside this whole arrangement. It is not above it. It is paid for by it. Cooking may have changed that arrangement because it touched food at the point where biology and environment meet. A root softened by heat is not the same challenge as a raw root. A piece of meat changed by fire is not the same challenge as raw tissue. A hard plant food, once heated, may ask less from the teeth and offer more to the gut. These changes do not have to be dramatic to be meaningful. They only have to be repeated, meal after meal, season after season, generation after generation. A small reduction in effort can become part of a larger shift. The body does not need to know why this matters. It only has to live differently because of it. Over deep time, the beginning of human uniqueness may have depended on many such small changes gathering together. Walking upright freed the hands. Hands helped carry food and tools. Tools helped cut, pound, scrape, and open what teeth alone could not handle. Fire added another layer. It changed texture, warmth, safety in some cases, and the amount of work required before food became useful. Social life added still more. A child could watch. An adult could remember. A group could return to a place where fuel was available. Someone could keep embers alive. Someone could share. None of these things alone explains the human brain. Together, they form the kind of world in which a demanding brain could be carried more safely. This is the careful way to understand the title. Cooking did not simply make humans smart in one sudden step. It may have helped create conditions in which the human brain could become more expensive without making the whole body collapse under the cost. It may have allowed energy to move through life in a different pattern. Less pressure in one place can make room somewhere else. Less time chewing may create more time watching. Easier food may help more members of a group survive and learn. A meal changed by fire may support not only the strongest body, but also the growing brain of a child, the memory of an elder, and the quiet patience of a group that returns to the same hearth again. The beginning of humanity was not a clean line. It was a long crossing. On one side was a body facing raw nature with teeth, gut, muscle, and hunger. On the other side was a body beginning to alter nature before swallowing it. Somewhere in that crossing, food became softer, energy became more reachable, and the brain became part of a new bargain. The question is not whether cooking alone built the human mind. The better question is how much of the human mind became possible only after the body learned to make food less difficult before the first bite. A human brain is easy to admire from the outside of the story. It gives us memory, language, imagination, fear, tenderness, planning, and the strange ability to picture things that are not in front of us. But inside the body, the brain is not a symbol. It is living tissue, and living tissue must be fed. It does not run on mystery. It runs on energy drawn from food, carried by blood, protected by the rest of the body, and supplied again and again without a long pause. Even in sleep, when the body is still and the world has gone quiet, the brain has not become silent. It keeps regulating, sorting, sensing, repairing, dreaming, and holding the inner life together. This is why a larger and more complex brain is never free. It brings power, but it also brings cost. Long before humans could explain that cost, their bodies had to carry it. In the deep past, this cost would have been part of every ordinary day. A brain that needs steady fuel has to live inside a body that can find, process, and absorb enough food. It has to live inside seasons that change, landscapes that do not always give generously, and groups that must move, wait, remember, and share. Hunger does not care that a brain is impressive. Cold does not care that memory is useful. Injury does not care that planning may help tomorrow. The body has to survive now, and the brain must be paid for now. That is the quiet pressure behind the evolution of the human mind. It was not enough for a bigger brain to be useful. It also had to be affordable. This makes the human brain different from a simple treasure that evolution could just add when it was needed. A bigger brain asks for more support from the whole system. Food must be found. The mouth must prepare it. The gut must extract from it. The blood must carry what is needed. The body must protect the head, grow slowly through childhood, and keep the brain supplied through years of learning. A brain capable of long memory and flexible behavior may help a group survive, but only if the body can keep it alive day after day. If the cost is too high, the advantage disappears. Nature does not reward an organ simply because it is impressive. It must fit into the full economy of the body. That word, economy, is useful here. Even though the ancient body had no numbers and no accounts, every body is an economy. Energy used in one place is not available in the same way somewhere else. Muscles need fuel. Digestion needs fuel. Growth needs fuel. Immune defense needs fuel. Pregnancy and nursing need fuel. Childhood needs fuel. For a long time, the brain stands among these needs, not above them. For humans, the striking thing is not only that the brain became large and capable, it is that the rest of the body had to make room for such a demanding organ while still staying alive in a difficult world. This is where cooking begins to return to the center of the story. A cooked meal can change the work that food asks from the body. It can make some foods softer, easier to chew, and easier to break down. It can help unlock energy from foods that would otherwise demand more effort. It can make eating less of a struggle in certain cases, especially when combined with cutting, pounding, sharing, and other forms of preparation. None of this means fire alone explains the human brain. That would flatten a long and complicated history. But it does mean that cooking belongs close to the question of how a costly brain could be supported. The brain did not grow in isolation, as if it were separate from teeth, hands, gut, and fire. It grew inside a changing way of life. When food became more manageable, the body's energy budget may have changed with it. When meals required less raw force from the jaw and less hidden effort from digestion, the body may have had a different set of possibilities. Over long spans of time, those possibilities could matter. A brain that remembers a path, watches another person's hand, learns the behavior of fire, or recognizes the right season for a certain food is not just thinking for pleasure. It is helping the body return to energy. And the energy, in turn, helps keep that brain alive. This is the first quiet loop in the story. Food feeds the brain, and the brain learns new ways to reach food. Cooking may have strengthened that loop. It may have made the human mind more costly, but also more sustainable. And once a body can afford a brain like that, the whole meaning of survival begins to change. A body cannot build every advantage at once. This is one of the colder truths behind evolution. Strength has a cost. Speed has a cost. Growth has a cost. A long childhood has a cost. A large brain has one of the heaviest costs of all, because it does not serve the body only when danger appears, or when food is near. It is always there, always living, always asking to be supplied. If a body gives more to the brain, the rest of the body must still have enough left to walk, heal, digest, reproduce, carry children, resist disease, and keep warm through the night. Nothing is added without being fitted into everything else. This is why the human brain cannot be understood as a simple upgrade. It was more like a new demand placed on an already busy body. For early humans and their ancestors, this demand had to be balanced against a world that was not soft. Food did not arrive in regular portions. Seasons changed. Dry periods came. Plants toughened. Animals moved away. Injuries made movement harder. Teeth wore down. Children needed years of care before they could feed and protect themselves well. In that kind of world, a body with a very hungry brain had to solve a practical problem every day. It had to keep that brain alive without losing too much somewhere else. If digestion required too much work, if chewing took too much time, if food gave too little energy after all that effort, then the body's balance became harder to maintain. The brain may help with memory and planning, but it cannot replace fuel. It cannot think its way past a body that cannot feed it. This is where the idea of trade-off becomes important. A trade-off does not mean one organ simply shrinks because another grows in a clean and direct exchange. Real bodies are more complicated than that. But it does mean that evolution works within limits. There are only so many hours in a day, only so much food that can be found, only so much energy that can be absorbed, and only so much risk a group can survive. If the brain becomes more demanding, then the whole way of living must help carry that demand. Food quality, food preparation, social sharing, tools, fire, movement, and care for children all become part of the same question. How can this body afford this mind? Cooking may have helped answer that question, not by solving everything, but by changing the pressure around food. A cooked meal can reduce some of the work required from the teeth and jaw. It can make some plant foods and animal tissues easier to break apart. It can change the way energy becomes available to the body. When this happens again and again, it does not only affect the moment of eating, it can affect time, strength, safety, learning, and the number of people who can benefit from the same food. A meal softened by fire may be useful to a strong adult, but it may also matter to a child still learning to chew, an older person with worn teeth, or someone recovering from injury. In a human group, these details are not small. They shape who survives long enough to remember, teach, and be cared for. The brain's cost, then, was not paid by one individual alone. It was paid by a way of life. A child's growing brain depended on adults who could find food, prepare it, and share it. Adults depended on memory, skill, and cooperation to return to the right places and handle the right materials. Older members of a group could hold knowledge that younger bodies did not yet have. Fire could become part of that shared system. It could soften food, extend the usefulness of certain resources, and gather people into repeated habits. None of this should be imagined as a perfect circle or a sudden invention. It was slow, uneven, and shaped by many environments. But the direction matters. The human brain became more possible in a body that was no longer facing food only with raw teeth and gut. It was facing food with hands, tools, memory, fire, and other people. So the paradox is this. The brain helped humans become better at changing the world, but the brain itself may have depended on those changes before it could become so powerful. Thought needed energy, energy needed food. Food became easier to use when it was prepared, and preparation required attention, learning, and social life. The human mind did not rise above the body. It rose through the body's long attempt to make an expensive organ affordable. Cooking belongs in the story of the human brain because it sits at the point where food, body, and behavior meet. It is not the only point. It is not a magic beginning. It should not be treated as a single switch that suddenly turned an ape-like ancestor into a modern human. The real story is slower than that, and more difficult to see. It is a story of pressures gathering over time. A changing climate, a body walking upright, hands becoming more useful for carrying, shaping, and holding, tools opening foods that teeth alone could not easily manage. Social life becoming more important, children needing longer care, memory becoming more valuable, and somewhere, Inside that long pattern, fire began to change what food was before it entered the mouth. That is why cooking matters. It did not stand outside evolution. It entered the ordinary work of survival. When food is cooked, the body receives something different from the raw world. Heat can soften many plant tissues. It can make some roots, tubers, and starchy foods easier for the body to handle. It can change the texture of meat and reduce part of the effort needed to chew it. It can make some foods safer, though not all foods, and not in every situation. These are careful statements, because the evidence for early cooking is complex, and the timing of controlled fire is still studied and debated. But the basic principle is widely understood. Preparing food changes the relationship between food and the body. It can reduce some of the burden that chewing and digestion would otherwise carry alone. For a brain that is costly to maintain, that kind of change matters. A demanding brain needs steady support. It needs the rest of the body to keep finding energy, absorbing energy, and protecting the conditions that make learning possible. If food becomes easier to process, even by small degrees repeated across many lives, then the body may have more room for a different balance. The jaw, gut, hands, sleep, social care, and childhood all become part of this balance. The brain does not grow as an isolated object inside the skull. It grows inside a whole way of living. Cooking may have helped make that way of living more stable, more social, and more dependent on learned behavior. This is where the ancient reason becomes clearer, but still not closed. A cooked meal is not only a biological event, it is also a behavioral event. Someone has to know where fuel is. Someone has to keep fire useful. Someone has to bring food close enough to heat. Someone has to wait. Someone has to recognize when food has changed enough to eat. These actions require attention and memory. They also create a world in which attention and memory become more useful. The brain helps manage fire and food, while fire and food help support the brain. Over long time, this may have formed a quiet loop. Not a perfect loop, not the only loop, but a powerful one. Food prepared by human behavior could feed a brain that became better at human behavior. This is different from saying that cooking made humans intelligent by itself. That would be too simple, and it would ignore the many other forces that shaped our ancestors. But it is reasonable to say that cooking may have helped change the energy conditions under which a large human brain could be carried. It may have helped shift the body away from a life ruled only by raw chewing and raw digestion. It may have made food more available to children, older adults, and injured members of a group. It may have increased the value of sharing, waiting, watching, and teaching. In that sense, cooking was not only a way to eat, it was a way of reorganizing life around energy. The human brain became possible through a chain of support. Food had to be found. Food had to be changed. Energy had to be drawn out. Children had to be fed for years. Knowledge had to survive from one person to another. Fire sat inside that chain, quiet but powerful. It turned part of the outside world into something the body could use with less struggle. And once the body began to rely on that changed food, the brain was no longer living in the same old bargain. It was living in a new one, where thought, fire, food, and the group slowly began to depend on one another. Fire does not only warm food, it changes food. That simple difference is easy to miss because cooked food now feels normal. A soft piece of cooked root, a bowl of warm grain, a roasted piece of meat, or a softened plant stem can seem like ordinary human food. But in the long history before cooking became part of daily life, food came to the mouth in a more resistant form. Plant tissues held their shape, fibers stayed firm, starches were locked inside structures the body had to work harder to open. Animal tissue could be dense, elastic, and difficult to tear. The mouth had to begin a long struggle, and the gut had to continue it. Heat changed the first conditions of that struggle. It did not make every food safe. It did not make every meal easy. It did not turn survival into comfort. But it could begin to loosen the tight hold that raw food had over the body. When plant food is heated, many of its structures can soften. Tough cell walls may become easier to break. Fibers that once resisted the teeth may give way more readily. Starchy foods can change in texture as heat and moisture alter the way starch behaves. The difference is not just in the feeling of softness, it is also in the way the food meets the body. A raw, starchy root may ask for long chewing and may resist digestion more strongly. A heated one may break apart more easily, both in the mouth and later inside the digestive system. The body still has to do its work, but the work begins from a different starting point. The same idea can apply to animal foods, though in a different way. Raw meat can be tough, especially when it comes from active animals with firm muscle and connective tissue. Cutting and pounding help, but heat adds another kind of change. Cooking can alter texture. It can make chewing easier in many cases. It can reduce the force needed to pull food apart. It can help the teeth, jaw, and digestive system face something less resistant than raw tissue. Again, this should not be exaggerated. Early humans did not live on perfectly cooked meals, and cooking methods were probably uneven for a very long time. Food could burn. Food could remain partly raw. Fuel could be scarce. Fire could be hard to control. But even imperfect heat can matter when the same problem returns every day. How to turn the outside world into usable energy. This is why cooking reaches so deeply into the story of the brain. The human brain does not touch fire directly. It does not chew. It does not digest. Yet it depends on what the mouth and gut can provide. If heat changes the food before eating, then the brain is affected indirectly through the whole body. Softer food can mean less time and effort spent chewing. More accessible energy can mean a different balance inside the body. Easier feeding can matter during childhood, when the brain is still developing and the body is still growing. It can also matter in a group, where food is not only consumed alone but shared, carried, prepared, and remembered. Cooking turns food into something that belongs partly to nature and partly to behavior. A raw root grows in the ground. A cooked root has passed through human attention. Someone found it. Someone brought it near fire. Someone waited long enough for heat to change it. That waiting itself is important. It means food is no longer only about immediate hunger. It is about timing, patience, memory, and control. The transformation happens outside the skin, but its consequences enter the body. The jaw meets a softer surface. The gut receives food already altered. The group gathers around a process that can be repeated and taught. Over many generations, this could help create a life where the body was not forced to pay the full cost of raw food alone. A small flame could not think, it could not plan, it could not remember, but by changing what food was, it may have helped create the conditions in which thinking, planning, and remembering became more worth carrying. The difference between raw food and cooked food is not always dramatic to the eye. Sometimes the shape looks almost the same. A root is still a root. A piece of meat is still meat. A seed or grain still looks small in the hand. But the body does not meet food only with the eyes. It meets food with teeth, saliva, jaw muscles, stomach acid, enzymes, intestines, and time. To the body, a small change in texture can become a large change in effort. A raw plant may hold itself together with fibers that resist the bite. A cooked plant may bend, split, and soften. A raw piece of animal tissue may stretch and pull against the teeth. A cooked one may break apart sooner. A hard starch may pass through the mouth as something stubborn. After heat and moisture, it may become something the body can handle with less struggle. The meal looks simple, but the relationship has changed. This is important because the ancient body did not eat in comfort. It had to protect its teeth. It had to save strength. It had to draw energy from food without losing too much time to the process. Chewing is not just movement. It is work repeated again and again. A tough mouthful keeps the jaw active. It keeps the face under pressure. It delays swallowing. Then, after swallowing, the gut receives material that may still be difficult to take apart. When food is cooked, some of that resistance is reduced before the body has to face it. Heat does not remove the need for digestion, but it changes the starting line. The mouth begins with food that may already be partly softened. The stomach receives something that may already be partly opened. The intestines may be able to draw more from it, depending on the food and the way it was prepared. Nothing in this needs to be made into a miracle. The power is in repetition. One easier meal does not change a species, but easier food, repeated across many lives, can shape habits, survival, and the body's long balance. Imagine the same landscape before and after cooking becomes common enough to matter. The plants are still seasonal, the animals are still hard to catch, the nights are still cold, hunger still returns. But some foods that were once more difficult can now be changed before eating. A root that would have taken longer to chew can be softened. Meat that would have demanded more tearing can be warmed and made easier to pull apart. Some plant foods can become more useful because heat changes their texture and their digestibility. The result is not a world without danger. It is a world where the body sometimes does not have to fight the food quite as hard. That difference reaches back to the beginning of the human story because early humans were not simply animals with bigger brains waiting to happen. They were bodies moving through real places, under real limits, trying to turn difficult matter into life. Food preparation gave them a way to change the terms of that exchange. Before cooking, the body had to take the raw world in almost as it was. With cooking, the raw world could be altered first. That alteration mattered not only for the strongest adults, but for the whole group. A child learning to eat could manage softer food more easily than tough raw food. An older person with worn teeth might still take part in a meal that raw toughness would have made harder. Someone tired, injured, or weak might benefit from food that did not demand as much force. In a social species, this matters because survival is not held only in the strongest body. It is held in care, memory, teaching, and the ability of a group to keep more people alive across time. Cooking also changes attention. Raw food can be eaten quickly if it is safe and easy enough, but many cooked foods require waiting. They require keeping food near heat long enough for change to happen. They require watching, judging, remembering, and sometimes sharing. These are small behaviors, but they gather around the same center. Food is no longer only found, it is prepared. Once food is prepared, the brain becomes involved before the meal enters the body. The mind remembers what can be cooked, how long it may take, what fuel is needed, where fire can be kept, and who needs the food most. Then the changed food returns the favor by feeding that same mind. This is the quiet loop at the heart of the story. Cooking changed the food. Changed food changed the work of the body. A body under different demands could support a brain living in a more social, remembered, and prepared world. The difference between raw and cooked food, then, is not only softness. It is the first sign that humans were beginning to place a step between nature and the stomach. And that step may have helped make room for the long, costly life of the human brain. When food becomes easier to process, the change does not stop at the mouth. It moves through the whole body. The teeth meet less resistance. The jaw spends less time fighting the same mouthful. The stomach receives food that has already been changed by heat. The intestines may have an easier path toward drawing out what the body needs. And behind all of these ordinary movements, one organ depends on the result more than almost any other: the brain. The brain does not care whether energy came from a raw root, a roasted root, a strip of meat, or a softened seed. It only receives what the body can successfully turn into fuel. But if cooking helps the body reach that fuel with less struggle, then the brain lives inside a different kind of body than before. This is the important point. Cooking did not have to touch the brain directly to change its future. It only had to change the conditions that fed it. A human brain is costly not because it thinks great thoughts every moment, but because it must keep working even when thought feels quiet. It helps control the body. It keeps memory available. It receives signals. It shapes attention. It supports learning. It stays active through sleep, fear, hunger, and rest. A brain like that cannot be supported by hope alone. It needs a body that can reliably bring energy inward. In a world of raw food, that energy came wrapped in more work. In a world where food could be heated, softened, cut, pounded, shared, and remembered, the path from landscape to bloodstream may have become less difficult. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to matter across time. The deeper change was not that every meal became easy. It was that the body gained another tool in the struggle to make food usable. That tool sat outside the skin, but it changed what happened inside the skin. A fire could soften what teeth would otherwise have to break. It could change what the gut would otherwise have to handle alone. It could help make certain foods more useful in a landscape where usefulness could decide who had enough strength to continue. From there, the story widens. Energy is never only energy. In a human life, energy becomes movement, patience, repair, childhood, attention, and memory. A child with enough food can keep growing. An adult with enough strength can carry, gather, and return. An older person who can still eat may continue to share knowledge. A group that can prepare food together can build repeated habits around the same flame. These are not separate from the brain. They are the world in which the brain learns to live. A brain grows not only from calories, but from the conditions calories make possible. It grows in a body that survives long enough to learn. It grows in a child who watches hands near fire. It grows in a group where food can be shared before and after danger. It grows in evenings where memory has time to pass from one person to another. This is why cooking belongs so deeply to the question of human thought. It connected food to behavior in a new way. Before cooking, a body could only use what its mouth, gut, and existing skills allowed. After cooking became part of life, food could be changed before it became flesh, blood, and brain. The outside world was no longer accepted exactly as it came. It could be worked on. It could be softened. It could be delayed. It could be prepared for someone who was not strong enough to handle it raw. In that quiet shift, survival became more social and more remembered. Of course, no one should imagine a single night when fire suddenly made the human mind modern. That is not how deep history moves. The evidence for early fire is uneven, and human evolution was shaped by many causes at once. But the basic relationship remains strong and careful. A brain that costs more needs a way of life that can feed it. Cooking may have helped build that way of life by changing the work required from food. It made the meal less purely raw, and in doing so, it made the human body less alone against the raw world. Somewhere in that long change, the brain found not a miracle but a new bargain. Less work spent breaking food apart, and more possibility for remembering, learning, waiting, teaching, and becoming human. Look at a human face, and it may not seem like a place where the history of fire could be written. The face feels personal. It carries expression, age, memory, family resemblance, and all the small signs by which one person becomes recognizable to another. But beneath that familiar surface is bone, muscle, teeth, and a long record of eating. A face is not only for seeing and being seen, tenta. It is also a structure built around the mouth, and the mouth is one of the oldest meeting places between the body and the world. Long before words, long before writing, long before a person could describe hunger, the face had to help turn food into life. That is why the human face matters in the story of cooking and the brain. It reminds us that the brain did not evolve alone inside the skull. It sat behind jaws that chewed, teeth that wore down, and muscles that answered the daily pressure of food. Compared with many other primates, the modern human face is relatively small and tucked under the front of the brain case. Our jaws are not as massive. Our canine teeth are reduced. Our chewing muscles do not dominate the head in the same way they do in animals that depend heavily on powerful biting and long chewing. This does not mean cooking alone made the human face small. That would be too simple. Many things shape the human head. Upright posture, changes in skull growth, tool use, diet, social behavior, speech-related anatomy, and the long pattern of human development. But food texture belongs in that story because chewing leaves pressure across generations. A body that must crush hard, raw, resistant food every day lives with a different demand than a body that often uses tools, cutting, pounding, and heat before eating. When food is softer, the mouth begins from a different place. The teeth do not meet the same resistance in the same way. The jaw does not have to repeat the same heavy labor for as long. The muscles of the face may face a different kind of daily work. Over one lifetime, this can affect wear, strain, and the experience of eating. Over many generations, changes in diet and food processing can become part of a much larger evolutionary pattern. The important point is not to say that fire simply carved the human face into its modern shape. The careful point is that cooking likely joined other forms of food preparation in reducing some of the mechanical burden of eating. Once tools and heat began to change food outside the body, teeth and jaws were no longer the only instruments doing the work. A stone could cut, a hand could pound, a flame could soften, a group could prepare food before it reached the mouth. This means the face was no longer facing the raw world by itself. Some of the work had moved into behavior. That shift matters for the brain, because the skull is not an empty container with a face attached to it. The head is an arrangement of compromises. It must protect the brain, support the eyes, allow breathing, hold the teeth, open the mouth, and give space for muscles that chew. A larger brain case and a smaller chewing apparatus are not separate stories placed side by side. They belong to the same body. As the human lineage changed, the head changed with it. A face under less extreme chewing pressure may have been part of the wider pattern that allowed the brain, jaws, teeth, and body to settle into a new balance. Again, this is not a single cause. It is a relationship. The face tells us that cooking was not only about what happened in the stomach, it also touched the shape of daily effort. A cooked or otherwise prepared meal reaches the mouth already changed. It asks for less force than many raw foods would ask. It gives the body a chance to spend less of its structure on breaking food apart. And when that happens again and again, the story of food moves into bone. The human face, smaller and less dominated by chewing than the faces of many close relatives, becomes a quiet reminder of a deeper change. We became a species that did not only adapt to food, we learned to adapt food to ourselves. In that long adjustment, the path toward a costly brain may have become less difficult, not because the face disappeared from the story, but because the face carried part of the evidence. A mouth that eats softer food lives under a different kind of pressure. This does not mean pressure disappears. Humans still chew, teeth still meet resistance, jaws still work, but the daily burden can change when food has already been cut, pounded, roasted, boiled, or softened before it enters the mouth. A raw root asks one thing from the face. A cooked root asks another. A strip of tough raw tissue asks one thing from the teeth. A piece changed by heat may ask less. Over a single meal, that difference may feel small. Over many years, it can shape how much wear the teeth experience, how long chewing takes, and how much force the jaw must repeat. Over many generations, changes in the way food is prepared can become part of the background against which bodies grow and evolve. This is why food texture matters when we think about the human face. The face is not only a surface of expression, it is a working structure. In earlier members of the human family and in other primates, jaws and teeth often carried heavier demands than ours usually do today. Large chewing muscles, strong jaws, and broad teeth can be useful when food is hard, tough, fibrous, or raw. They are not primitive decorations. They are answers to a world where food resists the body. If the food environment changes, the old answers may no longer be needed in the same way. The body does not redesign itself overnight. It changes slowly, unevenly, through growth, inheritance, diet, and survival. But if food becomes easier to break apart because of tools and heat, then the face enters a different relationship with the meal. The important word is relationship. It would be misleading to say that cooking alone made human jaws smaller. The shape of the human face was influenced by many forces at once. Brain growth, changes in the skull, speech-related anatomy, development during childhood, tool use, and shifts in diet all belong to the larger picture. Still, cooking is important because it changes one of the most repeated acts in life, eating. A change repeated every day can become powerful without looking dramatic. It does not need to arrive as a sudden turning point. It only needs to be present again and again, in the softening of food before the bite, in the shorter struggle of the jaw, in the way the teeth meet something already altered by human behavior. In the beginning of the human story, this was not separate from survival. A softer meal could help a young child who had not yet developed the full strength and skill of an adult eater. It could help someone whose teeth were worn. It could help an older member of a group remain nourished long enough to continue carrying memory and skill. It could help a tired body take in food with less effort after a day of walking, gathering, carrying, or watching for danger. These small advantages are not only about comfort. In a difficult landscape, comfort can sometimes be another word for saved energy. Saved energy can mean more attention, more patience, more recovery, and more time near other people. The face, in this sense, becomes a doorway into the deeper question of the brain. A smaller chewing system does not create thought by itself, but it belongs to a body that is no longer organized only around raw force at the mouth. When food is changed outside the body, the pressure inside the body shifts. Teeth and jaws no longer have to be the only tools. Hands, stones, fire, and shared knowledge begin to carry part of the task. The human face then sits between two worlds, the raw world outside and the prepared world that humans slowly learned to make. Behind that face, the brain was also changing. It needed energy, time, protection, and long childhood learning. It benefited from a life in which food could be processed before it reached the mouth, and in which meals could be shared across age, strength, and need. So when we look at the human face, we should not see a simple proof of cooking. We should see a quiet clue. The face suggests that our ancestors were not merely biting harder into nature. They were beginning to change nature before the bite, and that may have helped the whole head, including the brain within it, move toward a new balance. A change in the face is never only a change in appearance. It is a change in the way the body meets the world. The mouth is where the outside becomes the inside. The teeth, jaw, tongue, and throat begin the work of turning landscape into blood, warmth, movement, and thought. If that work changes, the meaning of the face changes too. A human face with smaller jaws and less massive chewing structures is not simply a softer face. It is a sign that the body was no longer built around the same level of raw biting force. Some of the old pressure had moved elsewhere. Some of it had moved into hands, some into tools, some into fire, some into memory. This is why the face can lead us back to the brain without leaving the subject of food. A larger brain does not sit above the mouth like a separate invention. It shares the same head. It shares space, blood, growth, and energy with the structures of eating. The skull must hold both the organ that thinks and the mouth that begins feeding it. If eating demands heavy jaws, large teeth, strong chewing muscles, and long daily effort, then the whole head carries that demand. If food is increasingly changed before it reaches the mouth, then the head can begin to settle into a different balance. This does not mean the face became smaller because someone cooked one meal. It means that, across deep time, prepared food may have joined many other forces in changing what the human head needed to be. Think of the difference between an animal that must solve food mostly with its mouth and an animal that solves food with a chain of actions before the bite. The first body needs strong teeth and jaws for much of the work. The second body can use hands to gather, stones to cut, pounding to break, fire to soften, and social memory to know which foods are worth preparing. In that second world, the mouth is still important, but it is no longer alone. The face receives food that has already passed through behavior. This is a quiet revolution. It means the human body began to move part of digestion outward, into the space around the group. The fire, the stone, the hand, and the shared habit all became extensions of the mouth. Behind this altered mouth, the brain lived under new conditions. Less time spent chewing could create more time for watching, waiting, learning, and caring. Food that was easier to handle could support children during long development. Softer meals could help older adults remain part of the group even when teeth wore down. Shared preparation could make meals more social, and social life could make memory more valuable. None of these changes alone explains the human brain, but together they show how cooking and food preparation may have shaped the environment in which a costly brain made sense. The brain was not simply growing larger inside a skull, it was growing inside a way of life, where food, tools, fire, and people increasingly work together. The smaller human face also reminds us of a loss. Humans did not become powerful by keeping every old strength. We did not keep the heavy jaws of animals built for relentless chewing. We did not keep the same raw dependence on teeth alone. Instead, we became more dependent on preparation. That dependence made us flexible, but also more vulnerable. A body used to cooked, softened, processed food is not the same as a body built to live entirely on raw toughness. The human face carries that compromise. It shows a species that gained possibility by giving up some older forms of independence. This is one of the deepest patterns in human evolution. We often become more capable by becoming more dependent on what we make, what we remember, and what we share. Cooking belongs to that pattern. It changed the meal before the meal entered the body. It may have reduced some of the pressure on the mouth. It helped draw the group around a repeated act. It fed a brain that could learn the act and pass it on. The face, the jaw, the teeth, and the brain were all caught in that same slow turning. So the story is not that fire made the human face small, and then the brain became large. The story is more careful and more human. As food became something prepared, the body began to reorganize around a new kind of survival. The face no longer had to be the main battlefield between hunger and the raw world. And behind that quieter face, the brain had more room to live inside a body increasingly shaped by fire, memory, and shared food. The work of eating does not stop when the food leaves the mouth. Much of it happens in silence, deep in the body, where no one can see it. The stomach receives what the teeth have broken. The intestines continue the slow task of taking useful material apart and drawing it inward. The liver, blood, hormones, and countless hidden processes help decide where that energy goes. To the person eating, a meal may feel simple: hunger, chewing, swallowing, fullness. But inside the body, digestion is one of the oldest forms of labor. It is not passive. It is not effortless. It is a long biological process that must turn the outside world into living tissue, movement, warmth, repair, and eventually thought. Before cooking became a steady part of human life, that hidden labor would have faced food in a more resistant form. Raw plant foods can be fibrous, tough, and difficult to break down. Some starches are less available before heat changes them. Raw animal tissue can demand more from the jaw and the gut than food that has been cut, pounded, and warmed. None of this means raw food has no value. Many animals live on raw food, and humans can eat many raw foods too. But the question is not whether raw food can feed life. The question is how much work the body must do to use it, and what that work means for a body carrying a costly brain. A digestive system is not just a tube through which food passes. It is living tissue that must be maintained. It needs blood, energy, immune defense, and constant repair. It must deal with useful nutrients, rough fibers, possible toxins, microbes, and material the body cannot fully use. A larger or more heavily burdened digestive system is not free. Like the brain, it belongs to the body's energy budget. If digestion demands more, that demand must be paid for somewhere. If food becomes easier to process, the balance may shift. This is one reason cooking matters so deeply. It changes the meal before the gut receives it. Heat can soften structure. It can alter texture. It can make some foods easier to digest. It can reduce some of the work that would otherwise happen entirely inside the body. The gut still has to labor, but it does not always start from the same raw beginning. This hidden shift may have been one of the quiet foundations of the human path. The human brain needs a steady supply of energy, but the gut is one of the main gates through which that energy must pass. If the gate is forced to struggle with every difficult meal, the rest of the body lives under that pressure. If fire, tools, and preparation make some foods easier to handle, then the gut can meet a changed world. That does not mean the digestive system stopped being important. It means the work was shared. The mouth did part of it. The stomach did part of it. The intestines did part of it. But now hands, stones, water, heat, and waiting could begin the work before swallowing. That is a profound change in the relationship between body and environment. It means humans were not only adapting their bodies to the food around them, they were adapting the food before the body had to accept it. In a deep evolutionary sense, cooking may have made the digestive burden more flexible. A root could be softened. A tough piece of meat could be changed. Certain foods could become more useful after heat had altered them. These changes did not remove hunger or hardship. They did not make early human life easy, but they may have helped the body spend less of itself on some parts of digestion and more on other demands of life. That matters when we think about children, learning, memory, and the long development of the human mind. A brain that takes years to mature requires a body and a group that can keep feeding it. It needs not just one successful meal, but repeated support through many seasons. The gut, then, is not a side character in the story of the brain. It is one of the ancient partners that made the brain possible. Cooking enters this partnership by changing what the gut has to face. The flame outside the body helped prepare the food that would soon become energy inside the body. In that quiet movement from fire to stomach to blood to brain, we can begin to see why cooking was never only about taste. It was about the hidden cost of staying alive and the slow possibility that a body with easier food could afford a more demanding mind. A body has no separate account for the brain, the gut, the muscles, and the rest of life. Everything is paid from the same living system. This is why scientists often speak carefully about trade-offs when they think about the evolution of the human body. A trade-off is not a simple exchange, as if one organ shrinks one morning and another grows larger the next. It is slower than that. It means that a body has limits. It must divide energy between growth, movement, repair, digestion, reproduction, immune defense, warmth, and the brain. If one part of the body becomes especially costly, then the whole way of living must help make that cost possible. The human brain became unusually demanding. That is clear. But it did not become demanding in an empty body. It had to share space and energy with the digestive system. The gut is also costly. It is living tissue that must be built, maintained, supplied with blood, protected from damage, and kept working through every meal. A body that depends heavily on difficult raw food may need a digestive system prepared for long, demanding work. A body that regularly eats higher quality food, processed food, or cooked food may face a different burden. This is the careful center of the idea sometimes called the expensive tissue hypothesis. In human evolution, changes in diet, digestion, body size, and brain size may have been connected through the way energy was allocated. This idea should not be treated as a finished answer to every question. It is a useful framework, not a simple law. Human evolution was shaped by many pressures at once, but the framework helps us ask the right kind of question. Not just, why did the brain become larger? But, how did the body afford it? Cooking becomes important because it may have helped shift the cost of food processing. When heat softens food and changes its structure, the gut receives something different from raw material taken straight from the landscape. The food still has to be digested. The intestines still work. The stomach still breaks things down. But the starting point can be easier. If this happened often enough, across enough foods and enough generations, it may have helped reduce some of the pressure on the digestive system. At the same time, tools, pounding, cutting, and sharing also changed the way food entered the body. Fire was not alone. It worked within a larger human pattern of preparing the world before swallowing it. This matters because a smaller or less heavily burdened gut is not simply a private internal detail. It changes the body's whole balance. Energy that does not have to be spent in one way may become available in another way. Time not spent chewing or recovering from difficult food may become time for watching, learning, carrying, and caring. A child who can receive softer food may remain dependent for longer, but also has more time for a slow-growing brain. An older adult who can still eat prepared food may continue to share memory, skill, and warning. A group that processes food together may support individuals who could not survive as well alone. In this sense, digestion is tied to social life. The gut and the group are closer than they first appear. The deep human story is not that the gut became unimportant while the brain became important. That would be false. The gut remained essential because every thought still had to pass through the gate of nourishment. The more careful idea is that cooking may have allowed some of the work of digestion to move outward, into behavior, tools, heat, and shared practice. The body no longer met food only with acid, enzymes, teeth, and intestines. It met food first with knowledge. Which plant can be dug? Which part can be eaten? How long? Should it sit near heat? What happens if it is not prepared? Where is fuel? Who needs the softest portion? These questions are not separate from biology. They are biology extended into culture. So when we ask why cooking changed the human brain, we are also asking why the human gut did not carry the story alone. The brain and the digestive system were partners in a long negotiation. The gut opened the door to energy. The brain learned ways to make that door easier to open. Cooking may have been one of the strongest habits in that negotiation, because it changed food before the body paid the full internal cost. And over deep time, that may have helped a costly mind become less impossible. Cooking did not make the human brain larger in a single leap. It did something quieter. It may have helped create a kind of body in which a larger brain became easier to support. That distinction matters. A leap sounds sudden, as if one discovery changed everything overnight. A condition is slower. It builds underneath life. It changes what is possible without announcing itself. In the deep past, every meal was part of that slow condition. Food had to be found, carried, broken, shared, swallowed, digested, and turned into energy. If fire and preparation made some of that process easier, then the body was living under slightly different rules. The brain still had to be fed, the gut still had to work, hunger still returned. But the struggle between food and body was no longer exactly the same. When part of digestion begins outside the body, the meaning of the body changes. A root softened by heat reaches the stomach as something already altered. A piece of meat changed by fire reaches the mouth with less resistance than it might have had before. A plant food prepared with pounding, soaking, or heating has already passed through human action before it becomes human tissue. The body has not escaped nature. It has simply learned to meet nature earlier, before the first bite. This is one of the deepest differences between humans and most other animals. We did not only evolve to fit an environment, we began to make small changes to the environment, and then our bodies lived inside those changes. The gut is a good place to see this. It is hidden, but it is not passive. It is one of the ancient engines of life. It decides what the body can actually use from the world. If food is hard to digest, the gut must spend more effort to open it. If food has already been changed by heat, the gut receives a different task. This does not mean the digestive system became weak or unimportant. It means the work was shared across a wider system. Teeth, stomach, intestines, hands, tools, fire, time and memory all became part of one long process. In that wider system, the brain was both a cost and a helper. It cost energy to maintain, but it also helped the group find food, remember places, control fire, and repeat useful actions. Over many generations, this could create a powerful pattern. A better fed brain could improve behavior around food. Better behavior around food could help feed the brain. This is not a perfect circle, and it was never the only force in human evolution, but it is a strong way to understand why cooking belongs so close to the question of the mind. The brain did not grow apart from meals. It grew inside a life where meals were becoming more prepared, more social, and more dependent on learned skill. This kind of change may have also affected who could remain nourished within a group. Softer food can matter to children, whose bodies and brains are still developing. It can matter to older people, whose teeth may be worn, but whose memory may still be valuable. It can matter to injured or tired adults who need food that does not demand so much force. A group that can prepare food is not only feeding strong bodies, it may be protecting knowledge, childhood, recovery, and care. These are part of the human brain's world. A large brain needs calories, but it also needs years of safety, teaching, and repeated experience. Cooking may have helped support that longer human rhythm, so the transformation was not only inside the skull, it was in the whole arrangement of life. Food became easier to handle in some cases. Digestion may have become less costly in some ways. Time around eating may have changed. Sharing may have become more important. The body could begin to organize itself around a brain that was expensive, slow-growing, and deeply dependent on others. This is why cooking changed the human brain forever in a careful sense. It did not create thought from nothing. It helped reshape the conditions under which thought could be carried, fed, taught, remembered, and passed on. The flame outside the body became part of the hidden economy inside the body, and from that quiet exchange a different kind of human life became possible. A day shaped by raw food can become a day shaped by chewing. That may sound simple, but it changes the rhythm of life. For many animals, eating is not a brief event placed between other activities. It is one of the main activities. Food must be found, handled, chewed, swallowed, digested, and often followed by rest while the body continues its quiet work. In a world without cooking, tough plants, hard seeds, raw roots, and resistant animal tissue can demand long attention from the mouth. The jaw moves again and again, the teeth grind and tear. The body waits for the mouth to make food safe enough and small enough to swallow. This is not wasted time from the animal's point of view. It is survival, but for the human story, it matters because time spent in one form of labor cannot be spent in another. When cooking became part of life, even if slowly and unevenly, it may have changed the length and weight of eating. A softened root does not ask the same work as a raw one. A heated piece of meat may give way sooner than raw tissue. A plant food changed by heat and moisture may require less force before it can be swallowed. The difference may not always be large in a single mouthful. But human evolution did not depend on one mouthful. It depended on repeated patterns, on meals across days, on children being fed, on adults returning to food sources, on older people staying nourished, and on groups learning what could be done again. If cooking reduced even part of the time and effort spent chewing certain foods, then it opened space in the day. That space did not have to look dramatic. It could appear as a longer pause near the fire, a child watching an adult's hands, a group waiting together, a person remembering where fuel could be found, or someone carrying food back instead of eating it immediately. These small changes are easy to overlook because they do not look like the birth of intelligence. They look like ordinary life. But ordinary life is where evolution works. A brain does not only need energy, it needs time inside a social world. It needs repeated chances to observe, imitate, fail and try again. It needs childhoods long enough for learning. It needs adults who can feed the young while knowledge slowly forms. If eating takes less of the day in some cases, and if food can be shared after preparation, then the brain grows in a different atmosphere. The body is no longer using every available moment just to break food apart with teeth and gut. More of life can gather around the acts that make humans human. Watching, remembering, teaching, caring, returning, planning. This does not mean early humans suddenly had leisure in the modern sense. Their lives were still hard. Hunger, injury, weather, predators, competition, disease, and loss remained real. Cooking did not turn the ancient world into safety, but it may have shifted the pressure. A body that can make food softer before eating has more choices than a body that must meet every meal in its rawest form. A group that can prepare food may feed someone who cannot chew as strongly. It may wait for food to change instead of spending all effort at the mouth. It may build a repeated pattern around flame, fuel, and shared meals. The beginning of the human mind belongs to that kind of pattern, not to comfort, but to altered pressure. Time is one of the quiet currencies of evolution. Energy is another. Cooking touched both. It could make some foods easier to process, and by doing so, it may have changed how much time the body had to spend in the old labor of eating. Around that saved time, however small at first, other human abilities could grow. The hand could practice, the eye could notice, the child could learn, the elder could speak through memory. The group could become more than bodies feeding side by side. It could become a circle of shared attention around food already changed by fire. And in that slower rhythm, the brain was not merely being fed. It was being given a world in which learning had more room to breathe. When time around eating changes, the rest of life can change with it. This does not mean early humans suddenly sat in peace, free from danger or hunger. The ancient world was still uncertain. Food still had to be found. Fuel still had to be gathered. Fire still had to be protected, watched, or remade. But cooking may have changed the social shape of time. A meal that requires preparation creates a pause between finding food and eating it. That pause is important. It brings bodies closer. It asks people to wait. It gives children something to observe. It gives adults a reason to remain near one another while food changes in the heat. A raw meal can be taken quickly if it is safe enough and easy enough. A cooked meal often asks for a shared process. Someone brings the food, someone tends the fire, someone watches the heat, someone notices when the food is ready. These acts are simple, but they are also social. They make food part of a repeated pattern, and repeated patterns are where memory begins to gather. Around prepared food, The brain is not only receiving energy after the meal, it is working before the meal. It remembers which foods can be cooked. It remembers which ones need more time. It watches another person's hands. It learns what smoke, smell, texture, and color may mean. It begins to connect hunger with patience, and patience with reward. These are not abstract ideas floating above the body. They are bodily lessons, repeated in the ordinary rhythm of survival. A child near a cooking place does not need a formal lesson to learn. The child sees who brings food, who shares, who waits, who is careful, who reaches too soon, who knows how to manage fire. The brain grows inside those small observations. This is one reason cooking may have mattered beyond calories. It made food more social before it became nutrition. It created moments where knowledge could be seen and copied. In a species with long childhood, that matters deeply. Human children are not born ready to live alone. They need years of watching, touching, asking, failing, and being corrected. A life organized around prepared food gives more chances for that learning to happen close to the body's most basic need. The lesson is not only how to eat, it is how to live with others. Food preparation also changes sharing. When food is gathered and eaten immediately, sharing may happen, but it is not shaped in the same way as a meal held near fire. Cooked food can be portioned, softened, delayed, passed from hand to hand, or saved briefly under the care of the group. The strongest person is not always the only one who benefits. A child can receive a softer piece. An older person can eat something easier on worn teeth. An injured person may be fed without needing to chew through raw toughness. In this way, cooking can connect energy to care, and care changes the world in which the brain develops. A brain that grows in a group where food is shared differently learns a different kind of reality from a brain that survives only by direct competition at the moment of hunger. This does not make ancient life gentle. It simply means that social support became one more way to move energy through the group. The connection to the human brain becomes clearer here. The brain needs fuel, but it also needs relationships. It needs voices, faces, gestures, timing, warning, trust, imitation, and memory. Cooking may have gathered these things around one repeated need: eating. The flame did not create social life by itself. Humans and their ancestors were already social before cooking became central. But cooking may have deepened the importance of being together at certain moments of the day. It may have turned feeding into an event where attention, learning, and cooperation mattered more strongly. The ancient body, then, was not only saving effort at the jaw or gut, it was entering a new rhythm where food preparation could hold a group in place long enough for knowledge to pass quietly from one person to another. That quiet passage is part of the story of the brain. A larger brain is not useful if it has nothing to learn and no one to learn from. It becomes powerful inside a world where experience can be shared. Cooking may have helped make that world more regular, not perfect, not peaceful, but regular enough that the same actions could return: gather, prepare, wait, share, remember. And each time those actions returned, the human brain was fed twice, first by watching and then by eating. The brain is often described as an organ of thought, but in human life it is also an organ of learning from others. A brain can receive energy from food, but it receives its shape from experience. It learns where the safe paths are. It learns which plants return after rain. It learns which sounds mean danger, which hands are skilled, which faces can be trusted, and which mistakes should not be repeated. Cooking may have mattered because it joined energy with learning in the same repeated place. Around prepared food, the body was fed, but the mind was also trained. A child could watch a root being placed near heat, a piece of meat being turned, a hard object being cracked, a hand being pulled back from flame, a portion being given to someone weaker. None of this needed to be explained in formal words. The brain could learn through stillness, attention, imitation, and return. This is why the story of cooking cannot stay inside the stomach. It has to move outward into the group. A cooked meal begins before the first bite, and that beginning is full of information. Where did the food come from? Who found it? What tool opened it? How close should it be to heat? How long should everyone wait? Who eats first? Who needs the softest part? Who remembers that this food is better after it has been changed by fire? These questions belong to survival, but they also belong to memory and social order. They make the brain useful before the food becomes energy. Then, after the meal, the energy helps keep that same brain alive for the next round of learning. This is the quiet exchange that may have helped make the human mind different. Food did not only feed the brain. Food preparation gave the brain more to do. It created a world where noticing mattered. A person who noticed how food changed in heat could eat better. A person who remembered a good fuel source could help the group return. A person who watched an older hand prepare food could learn without risking the full cost of trial and error. A person who shared food could strengthen bonds that later mattered in danger, illness, or childhood. These are small acts, but the human brain is built from small acts repeated across long time. It is not shaped only by crisis. It is shaped by ordinary evenings, by repeated gestures, by the same fire used again, by the same food prepared in a familiar way, by the slow transfer of skill from one body to another. In this sense, cooking may have helped create a richer learning environment, not because fire taught humans to think, but because fire made certain forms of thinking more useful. It rewarded patience. It rewarded memory. It rewarded the ability to watch carefully and copy. It rewarded the ability to connect cause and effect. This food softens when heated. This fuel burns longer. This place is worth returning to. This method makes a difficult food easier to eat. The brain that could hold these patterns had an advantage, and the cooked food that resulted could help feed that brain. The loop was not sudden. It was not clean. It would have been uneven across places and times. But over many generations, such loops can become part of what a species is. This also helps explain why cooking changed more than the individual. The human brain did not develop only for private cleverness. It developed in bodies that depended on others for a long time. Children needed care. Older people could hold knowledge. Adults had to coordinate, remember, and share risk. Food preparation fit naturally into that social world. It created moments when knowledge could pass without being written down, when the past could be carried in hands, habits, smells, and repeated choices. A flame could not speak, but it could gather people into the same place. A meal could not teach by itself, but the preparation of a meal could become a lesson repeated thousands of times. The ancient reason, then, is not only that cooking made food easier to digest, it is that cooking may have helped connect digestion, time, memory, and social life into one human pattern. The brain was fed by the meal, but it was also shaped by the waiting, the watching, the sharing, and the remembering that came before the meal. And once that pattern became part of human life, the brain was no longer living in a world of raw hunger alone. It was living in a world where food had become something learned, changed, and passed on. Cooking gave humans a strange kind of strength, but it also made them more dependent. That is one of the quiet paradoxes in this story. A cooked meal can make food easier to chew, easier to share, and in many cases easier to draw energy from. It can help a child eat what would otherwise be too tough. It can help an older person whose teeth are worn. It can help a tired body receive nourishment without fighting every mouthful as hard. From one view, this looks like a gain. Fire gives the body help. It softens the raw world before the body has to take it in. But from another view, something older is being left behind. A body that relies more on prepared food is not the same as a body built to live entirely from raw toughness. It has entered a new bargain. It gains possibility, but it gives up some independence. Many animals meet food almost exactly as it comes. Their teeth, jaws, guts, and daily behaviors are shaped around that direct meeting. A grazing animal must handle plant matter with the body it has. A predator must tear and digest raw flesh. A primate feeding on tough leaves, hard seeds, or fibrous fruits must spend time and effort with the mouth and gut. Humans moved in a different direction. We did not become the strongest chewers. We did not keep the largest jaws. We did not become specialists in one narrow raw diet. Instead, we became a species that increasingly changed food before eating it. We cut, cracked, pounded, carried, shared, heated and waited. The tool and the flame became part of the feeding system. That made humans flexible, but flexibility, also has a price. Once a species begins to depend on behavior outside the body, survival is no longer held only in bone and muscle. It is held in knowledge. It is held in memory. It is held in the group. This is why cooking belongs to the story of the brain in such a deep way. The human body did not only become better fed, it became tied to learned habits. A person had to know how to make fire useful, how to keep it from going out, how to find fuel, how to prepare food, and how to avoid mistakes that could waste a meal or cause harm. These skills are not instincts in the simple sense. They are learned, watched, copied, and passed on. A brain that can remember and teach becomes more valuable in that world. But the same world also becomes more dangerous if memory fails. If the fire is lost, if fuel is scarce, if knowledge is not passed on, if the group breaks apart, the body that has come to depend on prepared food may face the raw world with fewer old defenses. This is not weakness in the ordinary sense. It is the cost of becoming human in a different way. Humans gain power by moving part of survival outside the body. A stone edge can do what teeth do not do well. A flame can do what the gut would otherwise have to attempt alone. A shared meal can feed someone who could not manage the same food raw. But each of these gains creates dependence on tools, fire, timing, cooperation, and culture. The human brain was shaped inside that dependence. It became useful not simply because it could think, but because it could hold together a way of life that the body alone could no longer carry. This is the ancient loss hidden inside the ancient gain. Cooking may have helped make the brain more affordable, but it also helped make life more complicated. Food was no longer only found and eaten. It was prepared. Preparation required attention. Attention required memory. Memory required teaching. Teaching required others. The meal became part of a chain, and the chain had to be kept alive. In that chain, the brain found a larger role, but also a heavier responsibility. The human mind was fed by fire, yet it also had to remember the fire. It was supported by cooked food, yet it had to preserve the knowledge that made cooked food possible. That is why the story cannot be told only as progress. It is also a story of dependence. The flame that softened food may have helped nourish the brain, but it also pulled the human body into a world where survival depended more and more on what people knew, shared, and remembered. A human body that depends on cooking is not worse than a body that depends on raw food. It is simply organized around a different world. This difference matters because evolution does not always keep every older strength while adding new ones on top. Often, one advantage grows while another becomes less central. Humans became unusually good at using behavior to solve biological problems. We did not need teeth that could do everything. We had hands. We did not need jaws built for endless raw chewing. We had tools. We did not need the gut to face every difficult food alone. We had heat, pounding, cutting, and shared knowledge. These changes made life more flexible, but they also moved part of survival away from the body and into culture. That is one of the deepest shifts in the human story. A raw food specialist carries much of its food strategy inside its anatomy. Its teeth, jaw strength, gut structure, and daily feeding rhythm are shaped around what it eats. Humans moved toward a different kind of specialization. We became less specialized in the body and more specialized in behavior. Instead of one perfect set of teeth for one narrow diet, humans could use many foods in many places by changing the food first. A hard object could be cracked. A tuber could be heated. Meat could be cut. Seeds could be ground. Toughness could be reduced before the mouth began its work. This made humans adaptable across environments, but it also meant that survival increasingly depended on knowing what to do. The brain became central because the body was no longer carrying all answers by itself. This is where the loss becomes quiet but real. The human mouth does not have the same raw power as animals built around heavy chewing. The human gut is not designed like that of animals that live mainly on large amounts of hard-to-digest plant material. The modern human body is capable, but it is also dependent on food being selected, handled, and often prepared. That dependence likely has deep roots. It does not mean every early human meal was cooked. It does not mean humans could not eat raw foods. It means that as cooking and preparation became more important, the body's relationship with food changed. The old direct meeting between raw nature and body became less absolute. Between them stood tools, fire, time, and memory. This helps explain why the brain and cooking fit together so closely. A body that solves food through culture needs a brain that can maintain culture. It needs memory of places, seasons, materials, and methods. It needs attention to danger and timing. It needs social learning, because no child invents a whole food tradition alone. A young human learns by watching older bodies handle the world. Which foods are broken open, which are placed in heat, which are avoided, which can be shared with a younger child, which require patience. These lessons are part of eating, but they are also part of becoming human. The brain is shaped by them, because the brain must carry what the body no longer carries alone. This dependence also made humans more social. If survival depends on learned preparation, then isolation becomes more dangerous. A person alone may have hands and teeth, but a person inside a group has memory beyond one lifetime. The group knows where fuel may be found. It knows which foods are worth the work. It knows how long certain foods need to change. It knows who can chew well and who needs softer food. It knows through habits, gestures, and repeated evenings. Cooking, therefore, ties the brain to others. It feeds the individual, but it also strengthens the value of shared life. A cooked meal is not only a softer meal, it is a meal held inside a chain of knowledge. This is why the human body can look weaker in some old ways while becoming stronger in new ones. We lost some reliance on raw force. We gained a deeper reliance on preparation. We gave up some independence from tools and fire. We gained the ability to make many environments more livable. We became less like animals perfectly fitted to one food world and more like animals who carry a changing food world in memory. That bargain may have helped the human brain become more important, because the brain was needed to protect the very conditions that fed it. The body leaned on cooking, and cooking leaned on knowledge. Knowledge leaned on the brain. The brain leaned back on the food changed by fire. In that circle, humans became powerful, but never completely self-sufficient. We became the animal that could soften the world, and then had to remember how to do it. The story of cooking is often told as a story of gain. Fire gave warmth. Fire changed food. Fire helped humans draw more from what they ate. Fire may have made it easier to feed a brain that was becoming larger, slower to mature, and more costly to maintain. All of that matters, but if the story stops there, it becomes too simple. Evolution does not only give, it also rearranges what a body depends on. When humans learned to make food softer, safer in some cases, and more useful through preparation, they did not merely add a tool to an unchanged animal life. They began to live inside a new dependence. The body became linked to fire. The meal became linked to memory. Survival became linked to the group. A raw food body meets the world with the equipment it grows. Teeth, jaws, gut, claws, strength, instinct, and daily feeding rhythm all carry the burden. A cooking body meets the world differently. It does not wait for the body alone to solve every problem. It places steps between hunger and eating. It gathers fuel. It keeps heat. It changes texture. It delays the meal. It shares the result. It remembers what worked before. That chain can make life more flexible, but it also means the chain must not break. A human without the knowledge of food preparation is not simply an animal returned to nature. It is a creature whose body and brain have been shaped for a life where nature is often handled before it is swallowed. This is the quiet cost behind the human advantage. Cooking may have helped the brain by making energy more accessible, but it also made the brain responsible for protecting the very process that supported it. The brain had to remember where fuel could be found. It had to notice which foods changed well with heat. It had to learn timing, risk, sharing, and restraint. It had to hold patterns that no tooth or gut could hold. A strong jaw can crush, a long gut can process, but neither can remember a season, teach a child, or keep a method alive after the person who learnt it is gone. Once food became part of culture, the brain became part of the feeding system in a deeper way. It was not only fed by the meal, it helped make the meal possible. This dependence was not a failure. It was one of the ways humans became human. Many animals are powerful because their bodies are tightly matched to a particular way of eating. Humans became powerful by becoming less locked into one narrow food path. We could carry knowledge from one place to another. We could change food with tools and heat. We could feed people who were young, old, tired, or injured. We could turn difficult materials into something more manageable. But this flexibility came with a new vulnerability. If the group forgot, if the fire was lost, if fuel was gone, if no one passed on the method, the body stood closer again to the raw world it had partly moved beyond. In that sense, cooking changed the human brain not only by feeding it, but by giving it a duty. The brain had to become a keeper of procedures, places, dangers, and relationships. It had to carry what the body no longer carried through anatomy alone. This is why fire belongs so closely to memory. Not because ancient people thought of it in modern terms, and not because we can know exactly what they felt, but because any repeated use of fire for food requires learned behavior to survive. A flame goes out. A body forgets. A child must be shown. A group must return. The knowledge must cross from one generation into the next. The human brain grew inside that crossing. So the deeper meaning of cooking is not simply that it made food easier. It made human life more dependent on what could be learned and remembered. It helped move survival from the jaw into the hand, from the gut into the fire, and from the single body into the shared mind of the group. The brain gained support, but it also inherited responsibility. And from that old responsibility, the human mind became tied forever to prepared food, shared knowledge, and the fragile memory of how to make the world edible. A large human brain does not grow in isolation. It grows inside a child who cannot feed itself for a long time. It grows inside a body that needs warmth, protection, sleep, touch, and repeated meals. It grows inside a group where one person's hunger can become another person's responsibility. This matters because the human brain is not only expensive in the adult, it is expensive during childhood when it is still being built, shaped, and trained by the world around it. A young human does not arrive ready to live alone. Compared with many animals, human children pass through a long period of dependence. They need adults and older children to carry them, watch them, feed them, protect them, and slowly show them how the world works. Cooking belongs to this part of the story because softened, prepared food may have helped support a life in which the young could remain dependent for longer while the brain continued to develop. A raw world can be harsh on small mouths. Tough food asks for strong teeth, practiced chewing, and a digestive system ready for difficult work. A child does not begin life with the full strength of an adult jaw or the knowledge of what can be safely eaten. A cooked or otherwise prepared meal changes that situation. It can make some foods softer. It can make some foods easier to chew. It can allow food to be shared in smaller, more manageable forms. It can help turn a difficult resource into something a young body can use more easily. This should not be overstated. Cooking did not remove danger from childhood. It did not guarantee survival. Many children in deep history would still have faced hunger, illness, injury, and loss. But even a partial change in feeding could matter when repeated across generations. If more young bodies could be nourished through long development, then the brain had more time to grow into the kind of organ that depends on learning. The same idea reaches toward older people. Teeth wear down, strength changes, illness and injury can make eating harder. In a life based only on raw toughness, a person with worn teeth or a weakened body may lose access to foods that still contain energy. Prepared food can alter that boundary. A softer meal may allow an older person to keep eating, and a person who keeps eating may remain part of the group longer. This is important because older individuals can carry memory. They may remember places, seasons, dangers, tools, foods, and old mistakes. We should not pretend to know the private thoughts of people in the deep past. But we can say carefully that in social species, longer survival of experienced individuals can matter. Knowledge held in living bodies can help the young avoid learning everything from pain. Cooking may have helped protect that knowledge by making nourishment less dependent on the strongest teeth alone. The brain, then, needed more than calories. It needed a social arrangement that could keep vulnerable bodies alive long enough to learn, remember, and teach. A child's brain needs time. An elder's memory needs continued nourishment. An injured person needs care before strength returns. A pregnant or nursing body needs support from the group. Food preparation can become part of that support. The meal is no longer only a prize taken by the strongest mouth at the quickest moment. It can be softened, divided, delayed, carried, and given. This does not make early human groups gentle in every situation. Human life has always contained tension, hunger, and conflict. But cooking made it possible for food to move through the group in different ways. It created more chances for care to become practical. This connects directly to why cooking may have changed the human brain forever. A brain that develops slowly needs a world that can afford slow development. It needs feeding across years, not just one successful day. It needs adults who survive long enough to repeat lessons. It needs shared attention, shared danger, and shared food. Cooking may have helped build that world by making some foods more accessible to more kinds of bodies. The strongest adult was not the only one who benefited. The growing child, the tired mother, the injured hunter, the older gatherer, and the person with worn teeth could all be drawn closer to the same source of nourishment. In that way, fire did not only feed individual brains, it may have helped feed relationships between generations. And the human brain, more than almost any organ, was shaped by those relationships. Food can feed one body, but prepared food can support a relationship between bodies. That difference sits quietly beneath the history of the human brain. A raw piece of food is often close to the individual who can seize it, chew it, and digest it. A cooked or softened meal can move differently. It can be divided more easily. It can be held back for a child. It can be given to someone whose teeth are worn. It can be shared with a person who is tired, ill, injured, pregnant, or nursing. It can be prepared in a form that does not demand the same strength from every mouth. Once food begins to move through a group in this way, survival is no longer only about the strongest body reaching the meal first. It also becomes about how energy is passed from one person to another. This matters because the human brain grows slowly and lives socially. A child's brain needs years of feeding before it can carry the knowledge expected of an adult. It needs more than calories. It needs faces, gestures, repeated sounds, warnings, patience, and the presence of people who already know something about the world. Prepared food may have helped make that long dependence more possible. A young child does not need to master every difficult food immediately if adults can soften, break, chew, cut, warm, or share it. A child can remain in the circle of care while the brain keeps growing. That is not a small detail. In human life, childhood is not a pause before the real story begins. Childhood is where the brain becomes human through learning. The same movement of food across generations also works in the other direction. Older people, especially those with worn teeth or reduced strength, may still hold knowledge that a group cannot afford to lose. They may remember places where water was found, seasons when certain foods returned, dangers connected to certain animals, or methods for preparing difficult materials. We cannot claim to know exactly how every ancient group valued its elders, but it is reasonable to see that, in a species built on learning, experience can become a form of survival. If prepared food helps an older person remain nourished, then the group may keep access to memory that is not stored anywhere else. Before writing, before books, before maps, knowledge lived in bodies. Keeping those bodies alive could keep the past available. Cooking also makes care more practical. Care is not only kindness as a feeling. It is action. Bringing food, softening food, waiting for food, giving food to someone who needs it. A group may have many tensions. An ancient life should not be imagined as peaceful or pure. But the ability to prepare food creates more room for support. A meal can be changed to fit more than one body. The same fire that softens a root for an adult can soften it for a child. The same cooked food that gives strength to a hunter can also nourish someone who stayed behind. Energy begins to circulate through relationships, not only through individual effort. This is one reason the human brain should not be understood as a private organ. It is deeply personal, but it is built through dependence. A baby's brain depends on adult care. A child's memory depends on repeated teaching. An adult's skill depends on what was learned earlier. An elder's usefulness depends on being kept close enough to share what time has taught. Prepared food can help hold these stages together. It can make the group more than a collection of hungry bodies. It can make the group a system for moving energy, attention, and knowledge across age. Cooking did not create family bonds or social care from nothing. Social life is older than cooking, and many animals care for their young. But cooking may have strengthened the connection between food and long human dependence. It made some food easier to distribute. It made some meals easier for different bodies to use. It created repeated moments when people gathered around the same source of heat and nourishment. In that setting, the brain was fed not only as tissue, but as a learner inside a chain of care. The ancient importance of cooking may therefore lie not only in the food itself, but in who could eat, who could be fed, and who could remain long enough to teach. A human group is not only a group of strong adults. It is children, elders, injured bodies, pregnant bodies, nursing bodies, tired bodies, skilled bodies, and remembering bodies. This matters because the human brain did not become what it is inside a single, isolated individual. It became possible inside a structure of dependence. A child depends on others before it can feed itself well. An injured adult may depend on others before strength returns. An older person may depend on softer food, while still carrying knowledge that younger people have not yet gathered. Cooking may have changed the brain because it helped food pass through this structure more easily. It made some meals more shareable, more flexible, and more usable by bodies at different stages of life. In a raw world, food belongs more tightly to the mouth that can handle it. Strength, teeth, timing, and immediate access matter greatly. But when food can be softened by heat, divided after preparation, and carried back to others, the meal becomes less trapped in the strongest jaw. It can move toward the child. It can move toward the older person. It can move toward someone who could not gather that day. This is not sentimental. It is biological. Energy that reaches a vulnerable body can keep a brain alive, growing, remembering, or recovering. When this happens within a group, energy becomes part of social survival. The individual is fed, but the group is also maintained. This is one of the quiet ways cooking may have helped create a more human world. It did not simply add more food to life. It changed who could use food, and under what conditions. A softened meal can support a longer childhood. A longer childhood gives the brain more time to learn. A meal that an elder can still eat can keep memory near the group. A meal that can be shared after waiting near fire can strengthen repeated habits of care. These patterns do not need to be perfect to matter. They only need to return often enough to become part of the way life is organized. Human beings are unusual not only because our brains are large, but because our brains take so long to become fully useful. A young child has potential, but potential is fragile. It must be protected by food, warmth, patience, and other people. Cooking may have helped protect that long road. It allowed food to be changed before it met the mouth of the young. It allowed adults to make difficult foods more manageable. It may have helped bridge the gap between weaning and independent feeding, between helplessness and skill. In that bridge, the growing brain had time. And time, for a human child, is not empty. It is filled with watching, reaching, listening, copying, and slowly joining the life of the group. The same is true at the other end of life. An older person with worn teeth may not be the strongest body, but strength is not the only value in a learning species. Memory can be a kind of stored survival. It can hold where food was found, what season brought danger, which tools worked, which paths failed, and which mistakes should not be repeated. If prepared food helps such a person remain nourished, then cooking helps protect more than one body. It helps protect the past. Before records, the past lived in people. Keeping people alive kept experience available. This is where the brain, food, and generations meet. Cooking may have helped turn human survival from a contest of immediate strength into a longer chain of support. The young received food and time to learn. Adults received energy for work and care. Elders could remain part of the circle longer. Knowledge could pass through meals, gestures, warnings, and repeated preparation. The brain needed all of this. It needed calories, yes, but it also needed a social world stable enough for learning to accumulate. A large brain that cannot be fed through childhood is a burden. A large brain that can be fed, taught, and held inside a group becomes something different. It becomes a place where experience can gather. So cooking changed the human brain not only by making energy more accessible, but by helping energy move through relationships. It helped feed bodies that were not always strong enough to feed themselves. It helped make care practical. It helped connect generations through shared meals and repeated knowledge. And in that long connection, the human brain found the one thing it always needed beyond food itself: time inside the care of others. Cooking begins with hunger, but it does not remain only hunger. Once food is changed before it is eaten, a meal becomes something learned. Someone has to know which material can burn, which foods can be placed near heat, which foods need breaking first, which foods become softer with time, and which foods should be avoided. This knowledge is not stored in the fire itself. It is stored in bodies, hands, habits, and memory. A flame can change a root, but it cannot decide which root to bring. Heat can soften meat, but it cannot teach a child where the meat came from or why it must be handled carefully. The human brain enters here before the food becomes energy. It watches, remembers, compares, and repeats. In this way, cooking turns energy into culture, before culture turns back into energy. This is a deep human change. Many animals know how to find food, and many animals learn from experience. But humans became unusual in the way food knowledge could be built, shared, and carried across generations. A useful method did not have to die with the first person who discovered it. It could be shown. It could be copied. It could be adjusted to a new place. It could become part of a group's ordinary rhythm until no one needed to explain it every time. This is how a simple act like preparing food can become larger than biology. It becomes a tradition of survival. Not tradition in the decorative sense, not ceremony first, but the repeated practical memory of how to make the world edible. Food preparation also depends on environment. A group near water, forest, grassland, coast, river, dry plain, or cold season does not meet the same food world. Some places offer roots, some offer seeds, some offer fish, shellfish, birds, large animals, small animals, fruits, or seasonal plants. The body needs energy everywhere, but the path to energy changes from place to place. Cooking gave humans a way to answer many different environments with learned behavior. A difficult food in one place might become useful after heating. A hard seed in another place might need cracking or grinding. A piece of meat might need cutting before it can be shared. A starchy plant might become more useful after time near heat. The exact details would vary, and we should not invent what we cannot know. But the larger pattern is clear enough. Humans survive not only by having bodies, but by having ways. These ways had to be remembered. They had to be protected from forgetting. They had to be taught to children long before a child understood why they mattered. A young person might first learn by watching, the angle of a hand, the distance from the fire, the patience before touching food, the smell of something ready, the warning when something is not safe. All of this becomes part of the brain's education. The meal is feeding the body, but the preparation is feeding the mind with patterns. Over time, those patterns become invisible because they feel ordinary. That is culture at its quietest. It is not always a grand story or a formal rule. Sometimes it is the way a group knows how to turn a hard thing into a meal. This is why cooking changed the human brain in a way that cannot be measured only by calories. Calories matter. Energy matters. But cooking also made knowledge more valuable. A brain that remembers food methods can help the body survive. A brain that can learn from others does not have to pay the full cost of discovering everything alone. A brain that can pass on preparation methods gives the next generation a starting point. In that sense, cooking created a bridge between the hunger of today and the experience of yesterday. The body ate the meal in the present, but the meal often carried the past inside it. Someone before had learned what worked. Someone before had made a mistake. Someone before had remembered. And now the food was changed because that memory had survived. The fire may have softened the meal, but culture kept the method alive. The human brain grew inside that exchange, where energy became knowledge, and knowledge made energy easier to reach again. Every environment asks a different question of the body. A forest does not feed people in the same way as a dry plain. A coastline does not offer the same foods as a cold inland valley. A river, a grassland, a woodland, a rocky shore, and a seasonal wetland each place different materials before the mouth. Some foods are soft enough to eat quickly. Others are hidden under soil, sealed in shells, wrapped in fibre, protected by bitterness, or held inside hard coverings. The human body needed energy in all of these places, but it could not rely on one simple answer everywhere. Cooking and food preparation gave humans a way to widen the answer. A difficult food could sometimes become useful after it was heated. A hard food could be cracked, pounded, or softened. A piece of meat could be cut and shared. A plant that resisted the mouth could be changed before the first bite. This did not make every food safe, and it did not mean ancient people understood food in scientific terms. But through observation and repetition, groups could learn what worked in their own landscapes, that local knowledge mattered. A group living near water might learn different habits from a group living where roots, seeds, or land animals were more important. A group facing colder seasons might value storage, fuel, and warmth differently from a group in a warmer place. We should be careful not to invent detailed scenes we cannot prove. Still, the broader pattern is reasonable. Humans did not survive by biology alone. They survived by adapting behavior to place. Cooking was part of that adaptation because it allowed the same human body to meet many different food worlds with learned methods. The brain became important because the method had to be remembered. It is one thing for a body to digest. It is another thing for a mind to know which food is worth the effort before digestion begins. That knowledge does not appear fully formed. It grows from mistakes, warnings, imitation, and repeated success. Someone learns that a certain food becomes softer with heat. Someone learns that another food needs longer preparation. Someone learns that fuel from one place burns better than fuel from another. Someone learns that a food found in one season is not the same in another. These lessons are tied to hunger, but they are also tied to memory. They make the brain part of the food system before the food reaches the stomach. This is one of the quiet ways cooking changed human life. It turned eating into a local tradition of practical knowledge, not a tradition written down, not a tradition explained as theory, a tradition carried in hands, timing, smell, texture, and habit. A child growing up in such a group would not simply learn that food exists. The child would learn that food has a history. Some things are brought to fire. Some are cracked first. Some are avoided. Some are shared with younger ones. Some are saved for later. Some require patience. The brain learns this slowly, through being near others. In that learning, culture becomes as necessary as teeth. A tooth can bite only what it is given. Culture helps decide what reaches the tooth in the first place. This is why cooking cannot be separated from the environments where humans lived. Fire did not erase the differences between places. It helped people respond to those differences. The same basic act, changing food before eating it, could take many forms depending on what the land offered. That made humans unusually flexible. They could move into new places and carry not only bodies, but methods. They could use memory from one season to prepare for another. They could adjust when familiar foods disappeared and new foods appeared. The brain, fed by cooked and prepared meals, also became the keeper of these adjustments. So cooking changed the human brain forever, not only by helping the body get energy, it made energy depend more deeply on knowledge of place. The mind had to hold the landscape inside itself, where food grew, when it returned, how it changed with heat, and how a group could turn a difficult world into something edible. The human brain did not grow in an empty world. It grew inside a web of habits that were repeated long before anyone could write them down. Cooking was one of those habits, and it turned the search for energy into something that could accumulate. A single meal disappears after it is eaten. But the knowledge behind the meal can remain. A group may forget the hunger of one evening, but it can remember the method that answered it. Which foods soften with heat? Which ones need cracking first? Which ones should be brought close to the fire, and which ones should not? Which places give fuel after rain? Which season brings a certain root, seed, fruit, or animal? These are not small details when a body depends on food every day. They are the bridge between survival and memory. This is why cooking belongs so deeply to the story of the brain. It made food depend on knowledge, and knowledge depend on brains that could learn from one another. An animal can be shaped by its environment through the body it inherits. Humans added another layer. They carried a changing environment inside culture. A child did not need to discover every useful food alone. The child could begin from what others already knew. The body still had to chew, swallow, digest, and absorb, but the brain could inherit patterns before the body paid the full price of trial and error. This inheritance was not written in books. It passed through watching, touching, tasting, warning, waiting, and repeating. It passed through the way an adult handled food near heat. It passed through the way a group returned to a known place. It passed through the quiet correction of a mistake. Culture, in this sense, was not separate from biology. It was a way biology protected itself. The body needed energy. The brain remembered how to reach it. The group kept the memory alive. Over time, this made the human brain more than a private organ. It became a place where the environment could be stored. A landscape of food, fuel, seasons, danger, and preparation could live inside memory. That memory could then guide hands before hunger became desperate. Cooking made this even more important, because prepared food often requires steps. A raw food may be eaten the moment it is found, if it is edible and safe enough. A cooked food asks for a sequence. Gather, carry, break, heat, wait, watch, share. Each step gives the brain something to organize. Each step gives the group something to teach. A brain that can hold sequences, notice change, and learn from others becomes more useful in such a world, and the more useful that brain becomes, the more the group may rely on the behaviors that brain protects. This is the long loop between cooked food and human thought. Food gives energy to the brain. The brain holds the method that makes food easier to use. The method supports the next generation. The next generation carries the method further. None of this means cooking alone explains the human mind. It does not. Walking upright, tool use, social life, language, climate, childhood, and many other forces shape the human path. But cooking sits close to the center because it touches the base of all of them: energy. A tool-making hand needs a fed body. A learning child needs repeated meals. A social group needs food that can move between people. A memory needs time to survive in a living brain. Cooking helped link these things together. It made energy more than a momentary reward. It made energy part of a learned system, and once energy became part of a learned system, the brain had a new role in survival. It was not only solving danger after danger, it was preserving the ordinary knowledge that made tomorrow's meal possible. The human mind may have grown powerful partly because ordinary survival became too complex to be carried by instinct alone. A fire needs care, food needs preparation, children need teaching, places need remembering, mistakes need to be avoided. In this quiet accumulation of tasks, the brain became a keeper of culture, and culture became a way of feeding the brain. Cooking changed the human brain forever because it helped make food into memory, memory into shared knowledge, and shared knowledge into one of the deepest supports of human life. Fire leaves evidence, but not always clearly. That is one of the reasons the story of cooking must be told with care. A stone tool can remain in the ground for a very long time. A bone can survive if the conditions are right. A tooth can hold traces of wear, but fire is more fragile. Ash can blow away. Charcoal can be moved by water, trampled by feet, mixed with later layers, or destroyed by time. A burned bone may show that heat was present, but it does not always tell us how controlled the fire was, or whether food was deliberately cooked. A dark stain in the soil may be meaningful, or it may be difficult to separate from natural burning. The past does not speak in clean sentences. It speaks in fragments, and fire is one of the hardest fragments to read. This matters because it is tempting to ask for a single beginning. When did humans first cook? When did fire first become part of daily life? When did the human brain begin to change because food was changed by heat? These are powerful questions, but the evidence does not allow easy answers. Researchers study burned sediments, heated stones, charred plant remains, bones with heat marks, changes in teeth and jaws, and sites where fire seems to have been used repeatedly. Some findings suggest very ancient encounters with fire. Other evidence points more strongly to later, more regular control. The difficulty is that fire can happen naturally. Lightning can burn a landscape. Wildfires can leave marks. Heat can alter materials without telling us whether a human hand tended the flame. To say that early humans used fire, we need more than the presence of burning. We need context. Context means where the burned material lies, what surrounds it, whether the pattern repeats, whether tools or food remains are nearby, and whether the signs fit together in a way that suggests behavior rather than accident. Even then, certainty is not always possible. This is why a careful story about cooking should not pretend that we know the first meal ever cooked. We do not. We cannot stand beside the first person who placed food near fire. We cannot hear what they thought. We cannot say that one evening changed the human brain forever by itself. Deep history rarely gives that kind of scene. What it gives instead is a pattern that slowly becomes stronger. Fire appears in traces. Food preparation appears in the body. Teeth and jaws change over time. Tools become more important. Social learning becomes more central. The human brain becomes larger and more demanding within a long chain of changes. Cooking may have been one important link in that chain, but the chain is not preserved perfectly. The honesty of this uncertainty does not weaken the story. It makes the story stronger. A claim does not need to be exaggerated to be meaningful. We can say carefully that cooking changes food in ways that matter to chewing and digestion. We can say that the human brain is energetically costly. We can say that food preparation, tool use, social learning, and control of fire became deeply important in human life. We can say that many scientists see cooking as a plausible and important part of the conditions that helped support a large human brain. What we should not say is that cooking alone caused the human brain in one simple step, or that archaeology has revealed every detail of the first human hearth. The ground has not given us that kind of certainty. It has given us clues. Those clues ask for patience. They remind us that the human story is not a myth of sudden genius, but a slow movement through bodies, landscapes, hunger, tools, fire, and memory. The brain was fed by energy, but our knowledge of that history is fed by evidence. If the evidence is incomplete, the narration must stay humble. The fire that changed food may have helped change the human future, but the traces it left behind are faint, scattered, and often difficult to separate from the ordinary burning of the ancient world, and that faintness is part of the truth. The first cooked meals did not leave a clear doorway in time. They left a trail of ash, stone, bone, heat, and questions. There may never be a single date when anyone can say with complete confidence that cooking began. That may feel unsatisfying, because the mind wants a clear doorway in time. It wants a first fire, a first meal, a first moment when raw food became cooked food and the future changed. But deep human history rarely gives us beginnings that clean. The farther back we look, the more the evidence thins. Soft materials disappear, ash scatters, open-air camps are washed away, buried, disturbed, or erased. A hearth used by living people can become, after hundreds of thousands of years, only a faint patch of altered earth. Even when traces survive, they must be read slowly. Burned material does not always mean cooking. Fire does not always mean control. Heat does not always mean a meal. This is why researchers remain careful about the timeline of early fire. Some ancient sites suggest that earlier human relatives encountered fire or used it in some way. Other sites give stronger signs that fire was controlled repeatedly in a more regular pattern. But the difference between occasional use and dependable use is very important. A group might take advantage of a natural fire without fully controlling it. It might carry embers sometimes, lose them at other times, or use fire in ways that did not yet become daily cooking. Regular cooking requires more than contact with flame. It requires repeated access, knowledge of fuel, patience, safety, and some control over where and when heat is used. Those habits are much harder to prove in the ground than they are to imagine. This uncertainty matters for the story of the brain. If we pretend to know the exact first moment of cooking, we make the story weaker, not stronger. A brain as complex as the human brain did not change because of one campfire on one night. It changed through long pressures that came together over time. Food preparation, tools, social learning, changes in the body, climate, walking, childhood, and cooperation all shape the path. Cooking may have become more important gradually, first as a useful behavior, later as a deeper dependence. The evidence does not require a sudden beginning for the idea to matter. A repeated habit can change a species without leaving one perfect mark at the start. The body itself may preserve part of the story when the ash does not. Teeth, jaws, faces, gut proportions, tool marks, and patterns of diet can all help researchers think about how food was processed. None of these clues proves cooking alone, but together they suggest a long shift away from meeting food only in its rawest form. Humans and their ancestors increasingly used hands, stones, and eventually heat to change food before eating it. That shift fits with a body carrying a costly brain. It fits with longer learning. It fits with food sharing. It fits with the growing importance of knowledge that had to be passed from one generation to another. Still, fit is not the same as absolute proof. A careful history must keep that difference alive. This is why the question should not be, what exact day did cooking create the human brain? The better question is, when did food preparation become important enough to change the conditions under which brains, bodies, and groups lived? That question allows room for uncertainty. It allows cooking to be powerful without making it magical. It allows the human brain to be shaped by fire without pretending fire was the only force. In the quiet darkness of prehistory, many meals vanished without a trace. No smoke remains from them. No voice explains them. Yet the larger pattern still matters. At some point, food was no longer only found. It was changed. At some point, heat became part of the path from landscape to body. At some point, the brain had to remember not just where food was, but how food could be made more useful. The exact beginning may be hidden, but the direction of the change is not. Human life moved toward a world where survival depended more and more on preparation, memory, and shared control of energy. A careful story can still be a powerful story. It does not need to pretend that every ancient trace is clear. In fact, the uncertainty around early fire may help us understand the human past more honestly. Archaeology gives us fragments, burned stones, darkened soil, heat-altered bone, tool marks, changed teeth, old campsites, and patterns that suggest repeated behavior. None of these fragments is the whole story by itself. A burned bone is not a voice. A patch of ash is not a memory. A heated stone is not a witness telling us exactly who sat beside it, what they ate, or how they understood the flame. But when many clues are placed together, a slower picture begins to appear. Humans and their ancestors were not only eating what the world gave them in its raw form. Over time, they were increasingly changing food before the body had to use it. That is the careful truth at the center of this video. Cooking became one of the most important human acts because it joined the outside world to the inside body in a new way. It changed the work of the mouth. It changed what the gut received. It may have helped make energy more accessible from certain foods. It may have supported longer childhood, more sharing, and a brain that needed steady feeding. But this does not mean cooking stands alone as the single cause of the human mind. A brain does not emerge from one behavior. It emerges from a whole way of life. Walking upright mattered. Hands mattered. Tools mattered. Climate and changing landscapes mattered. Social learning mattered. Care for children mattered. Memory mattered. Cooking mattered because it touched all of these through food, the one need that returns every day. That is why we can speak with confidence about the importance of cooking while still being humble about the details. We do not have to know the first cooked meal to understand that cooked food later became central to human life. We do not have to imagine one genius beside one fire. It is enough to see the long direction of the change. Food became prepared, preparation became learned behavior became shared. Shared knowledge helped the body reach energy. Energy helped feed the brain. The brain then helped preserve the knowledge that made food easier to use. This loop is not a myth. It is a cautious way to connect biology, archaeology, and human behavior without forcing the evidence to say more than it can say. The archaeological record also reminds us that human evolution was uneven. Not every group used fire in the same way at the same time. Not every environment offered the same foods or the same fuel. Some places may have made fire easier to use. Others may have made it harder. Some meals may have been cooked. Others may have been raw, dried, pounded, cut, or prepared in ways that left almost no trace. Human life has always been local. The body carries one deep need for energy, but each landscape answers that need differently. Cooking became powerful because it could take many forms across many places. It did not erase difference. It gave humans another method for living with difference. This is where the story returns to the brain. A brain that lives in a changing world must remember more than one answer. It must notice patterns, hold methods, watch others, and adjust when the old way no longer works. Cooking strengthened the value of that kind of brain. It made survival depend not only on strength or appetite, but on preparation, timing, and memory. And because fire leaves such faint evidence, we should not confuse missing traces with missing importance. Many of the most repeated acts in ancient life vanished almost completely. The meals were eaten, the voices disappeared, the smoke lifted into air. What remains is scattered and quiet. Yet the human body itself carries part of the result. We are a species with costly brains, long childhoods, smaller jaws than many powerful chewers, deep dependence on learned food preparation, and a life built around shared energy. Cooking did not explain all of that alone, but it belongs among the central forces that made such a life possible. So the honest conclusion is not a hard claim carved into stone. It is a careful recognition. Somewhere across deep time, food changed before it entered the body, and once that became part of human life, the future of the brain could no longer be separated from fire, memory, and the quiet labor of preparing a meal. The human brain did not simply become larger and then look out at the same old world. As it changed, the world around it changed too, because humans were no longer only adapting to nature. They were beginning to alter the conditions of their own survival. This is one of the most important turns in the story. A beaver changes water with a dam. A bird changes a branch into a nest. Many animals shape small parts of the world around them. Humans, however, came to depend on this shaping in a very deep way. We changed stone into tools. We changed animal skins and plant fibers into useful materials. We changed places into camps. And with fire, we changed food before food changed us. The brain lived inside that growing circle of altered reality. Cooking belongs to this circle because it creates a world that the body could not have received from nature alone. A root does not roast itself. A piece of meat does not place itself near flame. A hard seed does not decide to become easier for the mouth. These changes require action. They require attention, timing, and memory. Once those actions become common, the body is no longer eating only from the raw landscape. It is eating from a landscape touched by human behavior. That is a quiet but enormous difference. The brain is fed by food that the brain, through hands and learned practice, help prepare. This creates a kind of loop. A better fed brain can help humans manage fire, tools, and food more skillfully. Better management of fire, tools, and food can help feed the brain more reliably. Over many generations, such a loop can become part of a species' way of life. It does not need to be sudden. It does not need to be perfect. It only needs to return often enough that survival begins to depend on it. This is why cooking should not be seen only as a technique. It became part of the environment humans lived in. The flame, the hearth, the prepared meal, the shared habit, the memory of what worked before. These were not outside human biology. They were the surroundings in which human biology continued to change. A child born into a cooking group does not meet the same world as a child born into a world with only raw feeding. That child may receive softer food. That child may watch adults prepare meals. That child may spend time near others while food changes in heat. That child's brain grows in a setting filled with repeated signals: warmth, waiting, danger, sharing, smell, texture, and the gestures of care. The brain is not only built by genes, it is shaped by the life that surrounds it. Cooking changed that surrounding life. It made food preparation part of the daily weather of human development. The same is true for adults. A person who knows how to use fire for food carries a different world inside memory. The landscape is not just a list of things to eat or avoid, it becomes a map of possibilities. This place has fuel. That plant becomes useful after heating. This food takes time. That one can be shared with a child. These are mental patterns, and they turn the brain into a living storehouse of the environment. The outside world enters the mind, not only as sight and sound, but as method. A brain like that does not merely react. It prepares. It compares the present with the past. It changes the future meal before hunger becomes desperate. This is one reason the human brain became so deeply tied to culture. Culture is not just music, story, ritual, or decoration. At its root, culture is also a way of keeping useful behavior alive. Cooking is culture in one of its most basic forms. It is learned energy. It is remembered nourishment. It is a method that allows the body to live in a world partly made by the brain itself. And once humans began to live inside that kind of world, the brain's task became larger. It had to understand not only nature, but the human changes added to nature. Fire changed food. Food changed bodies. Bodies carried brains. Brains remembered fire. In that slow circle, the human mind did not just grow inside the skull. It grew inside a world it was helping to create. Once humans became better at preparing food, food became better at supporting the kind of life humans were building. This is the second half of the loop. The brain helped control fire, remember methods, choose materials, and watch the slow changes in food. But the food, changed by those actions, returned to the body as energy, and that energy helped support the brain again. The process did not move in one straight line. It turned back on itself. Better attention could lead to better preparation. Better preparation could make energy easier to reach. Easier energy could support longer learning, more patience, and more dependence on skill. Over deep time, this kind of loop may have helped make the human path different from the path of animals that meet food mostly through the body they inherit. Humans were increasingly meeting food through a body, a group, and a remembered method. A cooked meal is a simple thing on the surface, but it contains many hidden steps. There is the search for food. There is the search for fuel. There is the ability to bring these things together. There is the control of heat, the waiting, the watching, and the decision that the food has changed enough. Each step gives the brain something useful to do, and when the meal succeeds, the body receives nourishment that may be easier to chew, easier to share, and easier to use in certain cases. The brain is then fed by the result of its own earlier work. This is not magic, it is feedback. A living system changes the conditions around it, and those changed conditions then shape the living system in return. In human evolution, cooking may have been one of the strongest examples of that feedback because it touched daily survival. The loop also made human life more dependent on learning. If food preparation becomes important, then a young brain must learn more than where food is. It must learn what can be done to food. That is a different kind of knowledge. A plant is not only edible or not edible. It may be difficult raw, but useful after heat. A piece of meat is not only found or lost. It may be easier to divide after cutting, pounding, or cooking. Fuel is not only wood on the ground. Some fuel burns better, some smoke more, some lasts longer, some may be scarce in certain places. These details create a world where survival depends on noticing relationships. The brain learns that one thing can be changed into another. Hard can become soft. Raw can become cooked. Hunger can become waiting. Waiting can become food. This is a powerful lesson for a developing mind. It teaches the brain that the world is not only something endured, it is something that can be worked with. That lesson reaches far beyond the meal. A species that changes food before eating may also change stone before cutting, wood before carrying, space before sleeping, and memory before danger returns. Cooking sits among these transformations as one of the most intimate, because it enters the body, the changed world is swallowed. It becomes warmth, movement, repair, milk for children, strength for carrying, and energy for thought. The mind changes the food, and the food keeps the mind alive. Over generations, this loop can strengthen the value of brains that learn well from others. No child needs to invent cooking from nothing if the group already carries the method. The child can begin where others left off. That is one of the great powers of human culture. It gives the brain a past before the brain fully understands it. A child sees food placed near heat, sees adults wait, sees portions shared, sees danger avoided, and slowly receives a way of living that is older than the child's own memory. Cooking therefore turns energy into inheritance. Not genetic inheritance alone, but learned inheritance. The body inherits bones and organs. The brain inherits methods, gestures, and expectations. Together, they form a human life. This Johnsine quote, "This is why cooking changed the human brain forever in a way that is larger than the size of the brain alone." It helped create a world where intelligence fed itself through practice. The brain supported preparation. Preparation supported energy. Energy supported childhood and learning. Learning protected the preparation. The loop kept turning, quietly, in the background of ordinary meals. And the more humans lived inside that loop, the less the brain could be understood as an organ separate from fire, food, tools, and the people who kept the knowledge alive. Cooking did not create intelligence in a simple way. It did not place a modern mind into an ancient skull. It did not turn one species into another by itself. The deeper truth is slower and more connected. Cooking may have joined a long feedback between energy, skill, social life, and the brain. Food changed by fire could help the body draw energy with less struggle in many cases. A better fed body could support a more demanding brain. A more capable brain could remember better ways to prepare food. Better preparation could make food more reliable again. Around and around the loop turned, not as a perfect circle, but as a repeated pressure across lives, generations, and landscapes. This is how small daily acts can become large evolutionary forces. A meal is gone after it is eaten, but the method behind the meal can remain. That method can be watched by a child, repeated by an adult, remembered by an elder, and adjusted by a group when the landscape changes. The brain is important here because it keeps the method alive. But the method is also important because it keeps the brain alive. This is the careful meaning of saying that cooking changed the human brain forever. It did not simply make the brain bigger. It helped build a world in which a costly brain could be fed, trained, protected, and made useful. That world included fire, tools, prepared food, shared attention, long childhood, and the slow passing of knowledge from one person to another. The brain became part of a system larger than itself. It was no longer only a private organ inside one head. It was a keeper of food memory, tool memory, place memory, and social memory. It learned where useful plants might be found. It learned how heat changed texture. It learned when to wait, when to share, when to avoid, and when to return. It learned from other brains, and then it carried those lessons forward. Cooking strengthened this pattern because food preparation is never only physical. It is also mental. It requires sequence. It requires judgment. It requires remembering what happened last time. A raw meal may be taken directly if it is safe and easy enough. A cooked meal asks the mind to stand between hunger and eating. It asks the brain to manage delay. That delay matters. In the space between finding food and eating it, thought becomes useful. The hand can prepare. The eye can watch. The child can learn. The group can gather. The future can enter the present because someone is acting now for food that will be ready later. This is one of the quiet roots of human life, the ability to hold a need in mind before satisfying it. Fire did not invent that ability, but cooking may have made it more valuable again and again. Over time, the human brain came to live in a world filled with such delayed actions. Prepare now, eat later. Teach now, help the child survive later. Remember this place now. Return when the season changes. Keep the ember now. Use the flame when darkness comes. These patterns link the brain to time. Cooking helped make time part of food. It turned immediate hunger into a sequence of memory, patience, and reward. That is why the story cannot be reduced to calories alone, even though calories matter deeply. Energy fed the brain, but the habits around energy shaped what the brain needed to become. It needed to be social because food knowledge lived in groups. It needed to be flexible because different landscapes gave different foods. It needed to be patient because preparation required waiting. It needed to be observant because heat changed food in subtle ways. It needed to be teachable because no child could safely learn everything from personal mistake. In this sense, cooking did not stand apart from the rise of the human mind. It was woven into the conditions that made such a mind worth carrying. The flame outside the body helped change the meal. The changed meal helped support the body. The body supported the brain. The brain remembered the flame. And from that long exchange, human thought became tied not only to survival, but to preparation, culture, dependence, and time. By the end of this long path, cooking is no longer a small detail beside the larger story of the brain. It has become one of the quiet forces running underneath it. Food was found in the landscape, but it did not always arrive in a form the body could use easily. The mouth had to break it, the gut had to open it, the body had to draw energy from it, and the brain had to be fed from whatever the body could win. Cooking changed that relationship. It softened many foods, changed texture. It made some forms of energy easier to reach. It reduced some of the burden placed on teeth, jaws, and digestion. It allowed food to be shared in different ways. It gave children, elders, and weaker bodies a better chance in some cases to take part in the same meal. None of this means cooking solved hunger or made ancient life safe. It did not. The world remained difficult, but cooking changed the terms of difficulty. It placed fire, tools, waiting, and memory between the raw world and the human body. That is the first quiet lesson of this story. The human brain did not rise above nature by escaping the body. It rose through the body, through hunger, through chewing, through digestion, through the daily need to be fed. A costly brain cannot live on imagination alone. It needs fuel. It needs a body able to gather and process food. It needs a childhood long enough for learning. It needs adults who can provide care. It needs older minds that can keep knowledge alive. Cooking may have helped hold these things together by making some food easier to use, and by turning meals into repeated moments of teaching, watching, sharing, and remembering. The brain was nourished by the cooked meal, but it was also shaped by everything that happened before the meal. The search for fuel, the choice of food, the patient waiting near heat, the careful handling, the passing of portions from one hand to another. That is why the story is larger than biology alone. Cooking made energy cultural, a meal could carry memory, a method could survive longer than one life. A child could begin with knowledge already gathered by others. A group could turn a difficult landscape into something more livable, not because the body had every answer built into its teeth and gut, but because the brain could remember what the body alone could not. This was powerful, but it came with a cost. Humans became more dependent on the things they made and remembered. We gained the ability to soften food, widen diets, share nourishment, and support a brain that needed long years of growth. But we also moved away from an older kind of independence. The human body became tied to preparation. The meal became tied to fire. Survival became tied to knowledge. The brain became the keeper of the very habits that helped feed it. This is not a story of simple progress. It is a story of a bargain. Fire helped the body fed the brain protected the memory of fire. Each gain deepened the connection between humans and the world they were learning to alter. In that connection, the human mind became something more than a large organ inside the skull. It became part of a living system made of hands, mouths, stomachs, tools, flames, children, elders, and shared attention. The ancient reason cooking mattered is not that it instantly created intelligence. It is that it changed the conditions under which intelligence could be carried. It helped make a demanding brain more affordable. It helped make learning more useful. It helped make care more practical. It helped turn energy into something that could pass through a group, through memory, and across generations. The flame outside the body slowly entered the human story as warmth, food, habit, and dependence. And once it did, the brain was never again only an organ fed by nature as it came. It was an organ fed by a world humans had begun to change before swallowing. Human beings did not become human only by becoming stronger. In many ways, our story moved in the opposite direction. We did not keep the strongest jaws. We did not keep the largest teeth. We did not become the fastest animal, the toughest animal, or the one most perfectly built to eat the raw world exactly as it comes. Instead, we became a species that changed the world just enough for the body to survive inside it differently. Cooking is one of the clearest examples of that pattern. A flame did not add muscle to the body. It did not make the teeth sharper. It did not give the gut a new shape overnight. What it did was quieter. It changed food before the body had to do all the work alone. In that change, human survival began to depend less on raw force and more on preparation. This is one of the deepest educational lessons hidden in the story. Evolution is not always about keeping every old strength. Sometimes it is about building a new relationship with weakness. A body that cannot easily chew every hard food may use tools. A child that cannot feed itself may be fed by others. An older person with worn teeth may remain nourished through softer meals. A brain that costs too much energy may become possible only inside a way of life that changes food, shares care, and preserves knowledge. Human power did not come from the body standing alone against nature. It came from the body learning to place memory, fire, hands, and other people between itself and the harshness of the world. That is not a small change. It means the human brain grew inside dependence, not outside it. Dependence can sound like weakness, but in human evolution it became one of our strongest tools. A child depends on adults, and because of that, the child has time to learn. A group depends on remembered food methods, and because of that, the group does not need to rediscover everything from the beginning. A body depends on prepared food, and because of that, it can make use of resources that might otherwise be harder to handle. The brain depends on energy, and because of that, it becomes tied to every act that brings energy closer: digging, cutting, pounding, heating, waiting, sharing, and teaching. Cooking sits in the middle of this dependence. It shows that humans did not simply adapt to the world, they slowly made parts of the world more usable, and then their bodies and minds lived inside the changes they made. This does not mean humans controlled nature completely. They never did. Fire could go out. Fuel could be scarce. Food could fail. Groups could suffer. Weather, disease, injury, and hunger remained stronger than any simple story of progress. But cooking gave humans a way to meet hardship differently. It allowed the body to work with the world before swallowing it. It allowed the brain to remember a method and then use that method again. It allowed knowledge to become part of nourishment. In that sense, cooking helped transform survival from a moment-by-moment struggle into a longer chain of preparation. The body still needed food today, but the brain could remember what helped yesterday, and the group could teach what might help tomorrow. That is why the brain changed not only in size or energy demand, but in meaning. It became an organ of connection. It connected the present meal to past experience. It connected one generation to another. It connected hunger to patience and danger to memory. It connected the raw landscape to a prepared life. The value of this story is not that cooking made humans superior in a simple way. The value is that it shows how deeply human life is built from exchanges. We gain by depending. We become capable by sharing. We become thoughtful because the body has needs it cannot solve alone. The ancient flame did not remove our limits. It revealed a new way to live with them. And from that new way, the human brain became not just a hungry organ, but a keeper of the fragile knowledge that makes life possible. The quietest cost of cooking is that it did not remain outside us. Fire began as something beyond the skin, a force in the world, a danger, a warmth, a moving light in darkness. But once food was placed near it, once roots softened, meat changed, seeds opened, and difficult meals became easier to share, fire entered the human body in a new way. It entered through the mouth. It entered through the gut. It entered through the blood that carried energy toward the brain. It entered through childhood, where softened food could help a growing body remain fed, while a slow brain learned the world. It entered through old age, where memory could remain near the group a little longer if the body could still eat. It entered through the hands that prepared meals, the eyes that watched, the patience that waited, and the memory that kept useful methods alive. Cooking changed the human brain forever because it helped make the brain part of a larger system, one that no skull could contain by itself. The brain was fed by food, but the food was changed by behavior, and behavior was protected by the brain. That old circle did not have a clean beginning, and it never became simple. It moved through landscapes, hunger, tools, mistakes, seasons, children, elders, and groups trying to survive one more day. Somewhere in that long movement, humans became less like animals that only meet the world with the body they inherit, and more like animals that carry part of their survival in learnt actions. We became creatures that do not only eat, we prepare. We wait. We remember. We pass on methods that may be older than any one person alive. A cooked meal, then, is never only a cooked meal. It is a trace of a very old bargain. The body gained easier access to energy in many cases, but it became more dependent on knowledge. The brain gained support, but it also gained responsibility. It had to remember the places where food could be found, the fuels that could burn, the ways difficult foods could be changed, and the social rules that helped energy move through a group. This is why the story should not be told as simple progress. Cooking did not make humans free from nature. It tied humans to nature in a new way. The raw world was still there. Hunger was still there. Danger was still there. But now there was a step between the world and the stomach. That step was made of fire, hands, tools, attention, and shared memory. The human brain grew inside that step. It became powerful not because the body had no limits, but because the body had many limits, and those limits demanded new ways of living. In that sense, the ancient flame did not only help build intelligence, it helped reveal what intelligence was for, not for thinking apart from life, but for holding life together when the body alone was not enough. It helped a child learn before the child could survive alone. It helped a group carry knowledge beyond one lifetime. It helped food become more than matter. Food became timing, method, care, and memory. And perhaps that is the deepest message hidden inside this long human story. We are not separate from the small acts that fed us. The brain that imagines the future was shaped by mouths that chewed, guts that worked, hands that prepared, and fires that had to be kept alive. Our minds did not rise in a clean line above the animal body. They rose through the body's need to eat, to share, to learn, and to remember. Cooking changed the human brain forever because it changed the world that fed the brain, and then the brain changed the world again. The flame outside us became a rhythm inside human life. It became part of how we grew, how we cared, how we depended, and how we became the kind of creature that can ask where its own mind came from. And after all this, one quiet question still remains. If the human brain was partly shaped by the food we learned to change, what else inside us was shaped by the ancient things we no longer notice?